I was standing under the lights when Wesley lifted the little wooden pendant into the air and told the whole first-year assembly it was a symbol of our eternal friendship. I had carved that pendant myself. I had carved one for every person in our group, sanded them smooth, cut each initial by hand at night while the others slept. Seeing mine held up in his fist like a trophy, I felt my chest go warm and stupid with hope. My best friend, the class leader, telling 400 strangers that I mattered to him. He had just had his own awakening, Sage class. Nearly every stat at 100, a divine skill the great crystal board spelled out as God's wisdom, and the whole deck had roared for him. Now, he was smiling back at me, calling me his most wonderful companion, praising my hands, telling everyone to watch what his dear friend could do. This was the place that was supposed to make us, a frontier college that hunted for the talent of tomorrow and sold its brightest to the sponsors who paid for everything. Our lives broadcast far and wide by magic devices so the money could watch us grow. Ordinary people topped out around 10 in a stat. Wesley had walked up before me and lit the whole board near 100 across the row, and the deck had screamed for it. I wanted to be worth a fraction of that. I wanted, just once, to stand under those lights and have the numbers say I belonged. So I climbed the last steps to the goddess statue, and I laid my hand on the cold crystal ball set into it, and I felt the awakening take, a small pull under my palm, like a held breath letting go. The board above the stage lit up with my whole life in a single column. No class, every stat one, non-growth, health 10, mana 10, a row of ones running down the crystal like something spilled, and at the very bottom, one line that did not fit the rest, dexterity, 2000. For one breath, the hall was silent, and I mistook that silence for awe. Then it broke, and it was not. They laughed. Jobless, someone said. All ones. The skill is a dud. Jack of all trades, a nothing. That dexterity has to be a typo, a cruel one. The word trash moved through the crowd the way a cold draft moves through a room, touching everybody at once. I stood there, and I held the little pendant out toward him, and I waited for someone, anyone, to laugh with me instead of at me. I wanted, more than I have ever wanted anything, for the friendship to be the real thing, and the number to be the joke. Nobody laughed with me. Wesley's face changed. I watched it happen, the warmth draining out of it like water out of a cracked cup, uncovering something that had probably been under there the whole time. He reached up, tore his own pendant off his neck, and dropped it on the boards. Then he set his heel on it and ground it flat. Wood I had shaped by hand, cracked apart under a polished shoe in front of everyone, and he did not even glance down while he did it. He turned his back on me. He told the hall he would like to introduce his real friends now, his splendid companions, and he called up Marcus. Marcus crossed the stage fast, big and grinning, the strongest body in our year. He sneered that I was a piece of trash in the way, and that he had been waiting a long time for this. Then his hands were on me, and he lifted me like I weighed nothing, and he threw me clean off the platform. I hit the wall. I rolled down it to the floor. And here is the part I keep coming back to. No one looked. Not one head turned. The ceremony simply went on over the top of me, Crane's oily voice picking right back up, as though a boy hitting a wall were part of the program. I lay in the dust at the base of the stage and learned in about 4 seconds what a whole year had failed to teach me. To every person on that deck, I had always been something you throw away when it stops being useful. Wesley was not finished. Before the rankings could be read, he stepped forward and pushed to have me expelled outright. Dead weight the group should shed before the sponsors judged it. Crane, all rubbing hands and delight, agreed at once and called a vote. 9 hands went up. Every classmate I had left, 9-0, unanimous. I was voted out of my own group and dumped into the special training class. Crane said the word with relish. The discard room, the place the trash goes while everyone else goes on to be worth something. They handed my new class a stretch of forest out past the walls, the kind of worthless ground the school keeps for the recruits it expects to quietly disappear. Then the rankings landed, and I got to watch the first small thing go wrong for the boy who had just thrown me away. His group placed 5th, C rank. He had been so certain that cutting me loose would lift them, and instead, the board pinned his golden little circle near the bottom of the whole year. He snapped at the others that he had expected far better once the big piece of trash was gone. His classmates shifted their feet and said nothing. It was the first crack in him. I was too wrung out to enjoy it, so I filed it away and kept it for later. Crane announced a prize next, a rich purse for whichever class received the first healing of the Academy's saint. Everyone knew that name, a saint from a famous line, spoken about as if the goddess herself had been born again inside her. Her first healing treated as a treasure, the sort of thing wealthy houses would line up to buy. She spent it on me. I did not understand what was happening at first. There were soft footsteps, then white robes at the edge of my vision, and a girl was kneeling in the dust beside me where no one else would come. Long, pale hair, a faint, sweet scent, and she looked at me like she was about to cry. "Do you remember me?" she asked. I looked at her a long moment, and somewhere far back, a memory turned over. A smaller girl who used to cry, a girl I used to stand in front of when the older kids got rough with her, back before either of us knew what a stat was or what a sponsor bought. She had grown into a saint the whole kingdom wanted, and she had walked the length of a silent hall in front of 400 people and the men who ran the school to kneel in the dust with the boy they had just voted into the garbage. I told her it was nothing, that I used to take scrapes worse than this all the time back when we were small. She only shook her head at that, as if I were still trying to shrug off something that mattered. Her hands began to glow. The warmth ran over my face, and the sting and the swelling went out of me. Then she smiled and said the thing that undid me a little, that it made her happy. Her very first healing got to be for me. She had spent the one gift the world had priced highest, and she had spent it like it was the easiest choice she had ever made. The whole hall had gone silent again. Only this time, the silence was not cruel. It was stunned. 400 people watching the saint, everyone wanted to spend the one gift she could never spend twice on the boy they had just called garbage. Then the hall came apart. Two of her attendants reached her first. Diana got to her before anyone, ponytail sharp, white chest plate catching the light, and took her by the arm. "Your first heal carries a blessing," she said. "It was never meant for a nobody." The other one, Sarah, hood pulled low over her eyes, backed every word in that clipped old-fashioned way of hers, saying a saint of Grace's standing had her first healing coveted by the richest houses in the kingdom, so throwing it away on a cast-off was almost laughable. They drew her back from me while she protested, insisting I was no worthless cast-off, that to her, I was more like A. And then they had her away before she could finish it. Across the floor, Wesley's own classmates had rounded on him. I caught the shape of it through the noise. They were furious, not at the cruelty of it, but at the cost, because if he had only kept the trash 1 minute longer, that fat prize purse would have been theirs. He stood in the middle of them, sputtering that none of it made sense, that a healing like that should have come to him. Then a bigger voice rolled over all of it. Barlow hauled the room back to order and told us plainly what the academy actually was. He wanted golden eggs. He wanted recruits who made the sponsors pour in money, and the ones who did not were failures he would crush without mercy. And he said it staring straight down at me, so there would be no confusion about who he meant. I got up off the floor on my own. Nobody offered a hand. I did not ask for one. Nobody in the special training class got fed. No dorm, no cafeteria, no breakfast. The school handed you a patch of dirt and a scrap of starter gear and waited to see if you would give up. By the time night came, I was hollow with hunger, sitting alone on the floor of a leaning shed on my stretch of forest, and I finally did the thing I had been too gutted to do all day. I opened my status and made myself look at the wreck of it. All ones, health 10, and that one absurd line at the bottom staring back at me, the number the whole hall had decided was a mistake. I do not know what made me poke at the skill instead of just closing the window. Jack of all trades, the dud. I turned it over in my mind the way I turn a bad piece of wood, hunting for the grain, and it opened. There were sub-skills folded underneath it. One of them stopped my breath, dexterous body. It let me take that mountain of dexterity and pour it into any other stat I wanted. I did not believe it. I moved 100 of it into life just to prove it was a lie. My health climbed from 10 to over 1,000. The hunger went quiet in me. I read the line 3 times to be sure the crystal was not playing a trick, and it held, that big new number sitting where a 10 had been a breath ago. I sat there in the dark and said it out loud, that this was impossible, that the thing they had all laughed at had been strength the whole time. Then my hands stopped shaking and started working. I fed the pool out one careful measure at a time, into endurance, so a hit would not fold me anymore, into strength until my thin arms did not feel like a stranger's, into agility and focus and the 5 senses until the world came into a sharper edge around me. Each hopeless one climbed off the floor and turned into something real. And with every transfer, I watched the boy made of ones die a little more, and someone balanced and solid stand up in his place. I still had hundreds of that mocked number to spare when I finally stopped, more than enough to keep pouring for a long time. They had branded me trash and dumped me on bad land. And on that bad land, alone in the dark, I had just found out I could build myself into anything. I went outside to feel the new body move. The grounds were empty, just pale dirt under the moon and the black line of the wall, and I was standing out in the open when the laughing started up on a balcony above me. 2 of them, Archer class recruits, bows already up, deciding out loud that the trash guy alone in the dark made good target practice. I heard the draw. I heard the string let go. And this is the part I had not yet known about myself. The arrow came out of the dark straight for my chest, and my new senses caught it before my mind did, the world seeming to slow just enough, and my hand rose and closed around the shaft in the air, a palm's width from my heart. It hung there in my fist, still quivering. For a second, nobody moved. The 2 on the balcony stopped laughing. I turned the arrow around so the point faced back the way it had come. I told them, quietly, that they could have it back. Then I threw it. It crossed the whole grounds in a flat gray streak, past both their heads, into the stone wall at their backs, and it struck hard enough to bury itself half its length in the rock. The wall took it like soft ground. A little dust drifted down beside their faces. They shrieked that I was a monster, and they ran, tripping over each other to get off that balcony. And then it was just me and the moon and 1 arrow standing straight out of solid stone. I stayed there a long time looking at it. The power every one of them had laughed at had been real the whole time. Wesley with his heel on my pendant, the 9 hands in the air, the principal promising to crush me, all of them had looked at the one true thing about me and called it a typo. I was done holding anything out and waiting for them to take it kindly. I picked myself up and I went to find out exactly what a number nobody respected could do. That was the night. By morning, I was in the forest and I had stopped waiting for anyone to hand me a thing. The whole camp had spilled out of the castle at dawn to build. Every class had a plot and a deadline. No house by nightfall meant sleeping in the dirt, and they had dumped my class on the worst ground there was. So I did the only thing that made sense. I opened the last piece of the skill they had all laughed at, the part that let me change my trade at will, and I went looking for tools I did not have to beg for. I had no coin and no borrowed gear. What I had was rock. I picked up a stone, turned it in my hand, and started shaping it, napping an edge, lashing it to a haft with green vine, my fingers moving faster and surer than they had any right to. A stone knife came together, then a stone axe, clean and balanced, out of nothing but river rock and creeper, and just making them leveled me. I felt it land in my chest like a second heartbeat, level 2. My dexterity climbed again, and a new trade opened up on its own. Appraiser, the eye that reads what a thing is truly worth. I turned it on my own crude axe first, half expecting a joke. It came back sharper than common iron, a caveman axe of stone, and the world's own measure said it would outcut the steel these people paid a fortune for. Down the slope, 3 warrior recruits were hacking at a trunk and enjoying themselves. They saw me crouched over my rocks and started in on the garbage guy, the dropout playing in the mud, thrilled to bits over a pathetic stone hatchet like some caveman who had never seen metal. I let them talk. Then I switched trades again to woodcutter, and I felt the logging skill come alive in my arms. I picked the biggest greatwood on the ridge, the one leaning toward their little work site, and I swung once. One stroke. The trunk was as thick as a man is tall, and it went through in a single motion, clean as cutting bread. The whole tree groaned and started down. I only said the one thing. "It's coming down." They looked up. I watched the sneers slide off their faces and turn into something else entirely as the whole tree dropped straight at them. They scattered, tripping over their own feet, and the tree hit the ground where they had been standing with a crash that rolled up the whole slope. In the ringing quiet after, the 3 of them stood there white-faced, staring at me, then at the trunk, then back at me, a jobless cast-off who had just felled in one swing what it takes trained warriors a morning to gnaw through. I ignored them and started cutting the fallen trunk into logs. They did not stay scared for long. 3 of them, iron axes on their shoulders, and a pile of my clean-cut logs was more than their pride could walk away from. They came back across the clearing and spread out around me. I kept working and let them posture. The wood was good, they said, too good for a dropout, and they would be taking it. When I did not move fast enough, one of them laughed and said the thing they all believed, that roughing up a special training class cast-off cost them nothing at all. No sponsor cared what happened to trash. No one would ever come to stop them. They were probably right about that last part. No one was coming. I set down the log I was jointing and shifted my grip on the stone axe. turning it from a tool into something else. I gave them one warning and I kept it flat because I did not want to fight. I wanted to be left alone. I do this for a living, I said. If you're still fine with what comes next, come on. They laughed at that. All three raised their axes at once. I swung the stone axe on a single diagonal, and the skill I had picked up did the rest. 3 iron heads shattered in the same instant, not one after another, all of them together in a single sweep. Iron bursting apart like dropped clay and raining down into the leaves. The halves kicked back in their hands, suddenly light, ending in nothing but splinters and jagged stubs. For one breath, none of the 3 understood what they were holding. Then they understood. The clearing went from 3 swaggering warriors to 3 boys scrambling backward on their heels. The one who had bragged that hurting me cost nothing was the loudest now, both empty hands up, babbling that it had been a joke, that they had never meant it, begging to forgive them and let it go. They did not wait for an answer. They turned and ran, tripping through the brush, glancing back over their shoulders like the trees themselves might come after them. And they did not stop until the forest swallowed the sound of them. I stood there in the quiet with my stone axe and let it settle. The bullied one had made the bullies run. No crowd, no cheer, no one to see it. Just 3 broken axes on the ground and me still standing. It was enough. It was, honestly, more than enough. The clean wind pushed me again, level 3, and another trade unlocked with it, carpenter. I felt the whole shape of building drop into my head like I had done it my entire life. I built a cart first, a good one, jointed and braced, with several times the haul of a normal wagon, and I loaded it and went back for more trees. By early afternoon, I had 50 great wood logs stacked and ready. Then I went to find where they had put us. It was a long walk from the castle, out past everyone else, and when I reached the plot for the special training class, someone had staked a board into the ground at the edge of it. Garbage dump, it said, in case the walkout here had not made the message clear. That was the land they gave the people they had thrown away. I stood at the edge of it for a second. Then I unloaded the cart. I had helped raise houses as a kid. I was born with good hands, and I had used them my whole life, but I had never worked like this. No nails. The carpenter skill let me cut every joint so the wood locked into itself. Beam into post, post into sill, the whole frame holding by nothing but the shape of the cuts. I laid a foundation, squared it, and started to build up. The house went up faster than I can say it. 2 full stories, jointed tight. The kind of build the world's own eye, rated high enough to shrug off quakes and fire and rot. And the strangest part was my own body. I never tired, not once. My rebuilt endurance just poured into the work and never ran dry. So I kept going, joint after joint, until a real house stood on the patch of ground they had labeled a dump. I stepped back and looked at it in the afternoon light. My first house, on the worst land in the school, standing. I was not expecting anyone to find me out there, but she did. Grace came up the path and stopped dead when she saw the house, both hands over her mouth. She walked a slow circle around it, touching the wood, and when she looked at me, her eyes were huge. "You built this?" she said. "Really, all of it, by yourself?" I told her it was decent. She laughed at me for that, the way you laugh at someone being ridiculous, and told me it was not decent. It was wonderful. She was the one who had crossed a silent hall to heal me when everyone else was throwing me away. I had not forgotten it, and I was not going to, so it came out of me easily before I really thought about it. "I could build one for you too," I said. "For your class, if you want." The way her whole face lit up, you would think I had offered her the moon instead of a house. She wanted it. Of course she wanted it. We went into the forest together to gather the lumber, her chattering the whole way, and for the first time since the stage, I did not feel like a thing that had been discarded. I felt like a person someone was glad to walk beside. Grace's attendant, Diana, turned it into a contest before I had even set my first beam. She climbed up on a rock so everyone could hear her and announced it like a herald. Grace was going to be a great saint, so her home had to be worthy of one, and every recruit who could build would build, and the best house of the lot would become the saint's residence. Then she folded her arms and waited for me to embarrass myself. The others thought that was hilarious. The trash guy entering a building contest, one man against whole crews. They called out that I would manage a doghouse if I was lucky. I let them laugh and laid out my foundation. The laughing thinned out when they saw the footprint. It was a full 2-story house, and I was setting it alone. I built it out of gold heart wood this time. a high grade that carries a faint sweet scent and settles the nerves of anyone inside, every joint locked. It rose over the crooked little shacks around it like an oak over weeds, and when the eye read it back to me, the quality was higher than anything for a mile. Grace came up while I was finishing and reached up to wipe a smudge of sawdust off my cheek before I could stop her. I told her not to bother. Dirt is a carpenter's metal. She went still for a second, close, catching the scent of my shirt, and something old moved behind her eyes. Then she went pink to her ears and pulled back, stammering an apology, mumbling that she had not meant to bury her face against me like she used to when we were small. I told her it was fine. It was. Even Diana could not hold the line. She stalked through the finished rooms hunting for some trick or hidden flaw, and I watched the hostility drain out of her face as the calm of the place got to her. All she would give me out loud was that she had revised me up from useless to barely passable, and I should not let it go to my head. From her, that was practically a bow. Then I made my one mistake. I put a hand on the wall of the nearest shack, just to test how it was set. It folded like wet cardboard, and it did not stop with itself. It sagged into the hut beside it, which sagged into the next, and the whole crooked row went down one after another in a long, slow domino of splintering timber, until every shabby house on that ground had collapsed into a heap, and mine was the only thing left standing in the wreckage. I had barely leaned on it. I checked one of the ruined huts with the appraising eye out of curiosity, and the thing rated below 0, negative. It had been built so badly it was worse than no house at all, held up by spite and hurry and nothing else. A breath of wind would have finished what my hand did. The recruits did not see it that way. They stood in the ruins of their own work and wailed that they had lost to a cast-off, that it had to be a mistake, and one of them spat that if this were not the saint's ground, he would put a torch to my house himself. I felt a flicker of pity for them. Then I heard that, and I let the flicker go out, and I decided their houses were their own problem. I did not see the next part. I heard the scream, a single sharp cry that carried all the way across the camp and made me look up. I got the rest of it secondhand, and it was not hard to put together. The same thing had happened to Group 20, Wesley's group. Their shacks had gone down in the very same chain, the whole row of them, and left the students standing in a field of broken sticks. And this time, there was no accidental hand to blame. They had built badly all on their own, so they rounded on him, the sage, the golden boy who had thrown me off the stage and told them all it was the smart thing to do. From what reached me, they demanded to know why their homes were garbage when they had gathered exactly what he told them to. And one after another, they started saying the quiet thing out loud, that expelling the good-for-nothing might have been a mistake, that the good-for-nothing had built a mansion while their leader gave them a pile of sticks. He did what he always did. He refused to carry any of it. A sage is never wrong, he told them. If the shacks were shabby, it was their flawed methods, not his judgment. It did not land. It only made them angrier. And underneath the arrogance, from everything I heard, something else was starting to eat at him. He had watched the boy he called trash raise a real house in a day, and he could not unsee it. I used to be the one who kept his group calm when they quarreled. Now I was gone, and the calm was gone with me, and the unease he felt over having thrown me away was beginning to curdle into something meaner. Good, let it. I got this next part from Grace, and from how loud the shredding was. The principal and the vice principal had a money problem. They ran the prizes at this school, and the prizes were how they funneled sponsor coin back into their own pockets, since it all got spent inside the academy anyway. Their first prize, the Saints Healing Award, they had refused to give me on the grounds that a special class cast-off would just run off with the money. Now, they needed a new one to keep the sponsors happy, so they invented a best-built house prize. And to make sure I could not win it, the vice principal had quietly moved my plot deep into the forest, off where no judge would ever wander, congratulating himself on it the whole time. Then they toured the plots to pick a winner, and they found a magnificent 2-story house standing over a field of shacks. They went to it delighted, ready to hand the award to whoever had raised the only real house in the school, right up until they knocked and Grace answered. They asked her who built it, and she told them, bright and proud, and not the least bit shy about it, that it was made by the person she respected and loved most in the world. Then she said my name. The vice principal shrieked like a startled bird. The principal tore both prize certificates to shreds on the spot, standing right there in front of her, and stormed off to find that every other recruit was still crawling around in the ruins of their collapsed shacks, and that the one good house in the entire academy had been built by the boy they had exiled to a garbage dump. They had moved my land to the ends of the earth to keep me from winning, and I had built the winner anyway. They did not give up. Two officials that greedy do not give up over one house. They put their heads together and came up with another prize, a first to level up award, and this one they were sure of. A prize like that would go to a class leader, one of their golden students, someone they could stomach handing the money to. They were still congratulating each other when a bright flash of gold went up over the tree line, the unmistakable light of someone leveling, and they came running to award it before anyone could argue. The light was coming off my plot. I was standing next to my house, out where they had banished my land, having just crossed into level 4 while I patched a wall the wind had shaken. I looked up to see the two of them crash out of the trees, certificates ready, and watched the ready drop off their faces as they realized whose plot they had run to. I did not say anything. I did not have to. They had rigged the healing prize and lost it to me. They had rigged the house prize and lost it to me. They had rigged a level prize meant for their best students, and the boy they called trash had already reached level 4 before their golden ones were anywhere close. Both of them screamed, right there in the dusk, in front of my finished house. They screamed like the whole world had wronged them. I picked up my hammer and went back to fixing my wall. They had still not given me a single thing I asked for that first day. That was fine. I was not asking anymore. I had a house on the worst land in the school, a level lead they could not scheme away, and a number nobody respected doing exactly what I told it to. Let them scream. I had building to do. I had gone to sleep telling the whole faculty to scream all they liked. I had building to do, so I got up and did it. The officials were already gone by the time I stepped outside. I caught the last of them scurrying off down the tree line, throwing looks back at me like I might grow a second head. Whatever spooked them, I let them run. The status board offered me something new that morning. Ninja, it called it, an upper tier trade out of the eastern country, all stealth and throne steel. I took it without thinking twice. Then I sat on my own step and carved. Leftover greatwood, a stone knife, 30 little 4-pointed stars. By the time the sun cleared the branches, my hands did the fine work while I barely watched them. That number nobody respected pouring itself into every cut. I hung a knot of wood on a trunk for a target and started throwing. The first few thudded home. After that, missing simply stopped being a thing that could happen. I threw until the target was a ruined mess of splinters. Then I threw at the splinters. That was when the mages found me. A pack of them came swaggering up through the trees, robes and all, led by a loud one named Nathan. He announced that fire was the second thing a man needed to survive after water, and that he, being a great mage, might grant me some if I knelt and begged for it properly. I told him I made my own. He didn't like that. To prove a point, he lit a branch with his ignite spell and flung the burning thing straight through my doorway. His followers packed the door to watch the place go up. They were already grinning about being heroes, about burning out a worthless cast-off. The branch hit my floor and lay there. It smoked, it sputtered, and then it went out. Because I had built that house well, and the wood in it does not care for fire. The grins slid off their faces. I walked past all of them, crouched over a little scrap of kindling with a fire starter I'd carved that same morning, and coaxed up a flame of my own in about the time it takes to yawn. When they saw it, they stopped being cruel and started begging, "Hand it over, give us the fire, we only wanted to be heroes." So I gave it to them. I touched a flame to the tips of a fistful of shuriken and threw the whole volley low and flat, right across their hems. Little stars of fire went streaking into the pack, and every one of them found cloth. Robes caught at the ankle. They shrieked and slapped at themselves and scrambled to catch the flames on their own wood and failed at that too, because catching fire is easy and putting it where you want it is not. Nobody was hurt. Every robe in that group, though, went home a good deep shorter than it arrived, and the great mage Nathan led his heroes off through the trees in tears. I put the fire out, swept up, and went to find lunch. I hadn't eaten since morning, and a ninja climbs like the trees owe him money. I went up the first big trunk and came down with a lap full of forest nuts, ate a few mushrooms once I'd checked they were safe, and wove a broadleaf bag to carry the rest. Halfway through filling it, my appraiser's eye caught on something growing quiet in the shade, a twister mushroom. A king among mushrooms, so rare most people go a life without seeing one, and cruel enough to wear the exact face of a killer lookalike, so that picking the wrong twin ends you on the spot. Mine was the real thing. I picked every last one and kept walking. I nearly walked into a whole crowd of recruits before I noticed them. They were gathered around a bed of mushrooms, red ones and blue ones tangled together, and at the center of the fuss stood the most striking woman I'd seen since I got to this place. An alchemist, poised and unbothered, who plainly could not tell one mushroom from the next. A small thief-class boy at her elbow was swearing up and down that the red ones were the poison. I knew him, vaguely, from my old Group 20. He called himself Toby, and he was very sure. He was also wrong. I said so, plainly. The blue are the poison, stomach pain, and worse, and the red are perfectly good to eat. Toby wheeled on me, spitting that everybody knows red mushrooms are poison and that a jobless washout from Group 20 was the last man alive worth listening to. The alchemist looked at him. Then she looked at me. Then she told her people to gather the red. "Everyone just calls me Evelyn," she said, coming closer while Toby stalked off clutching a fistful of blue. She said I'd earned a reward and held out 2 of them, a little bag of salt from inside her robe. Or, she added with a nod toward her own lips, this. I took the salt. Food needs seasoning. Something flickered across her face, amused and interested all at once. And then she leaned in and kissed my cheek anyway. Something ticked over in me as she walked off. A small, strange lift, like a lock turning. My luck, of all things, the one stat that had never once moved, had nudged up a notch. Her kiss, apparently, ran in the family and carried a little fortune with it. "May it find you," she'd called back over her shoulder. I decided not to argue with it. Back home, I was hungry enough to hear it. I switched over to stonemason, knocked together a wooden mallet and a stone chisel, cut myself a proper stove from the local rock, poor stuff, that stone, next to my great wood, and I filed that away for later, and built a fire in it that stayed where I put it. Then I roasted the whole batch of twister mushrooms, salted them with Evelyn's salt, and ate every single one. First time in longer than I wanted to count that I stood up from a meal actually full. I had barely wiped my hands when the principal and the vice principal came pounding up the path, robes hiked, wheezing. They'd seen it, of course. The whole campus is broadcast to the world through their magic devices. Nothing anyone does out here stays private. They'd watched me find a twister mushroom, a phantom delicacy men would trade a title for, and now they wanted it. Barlow puffed himself up and offered to haul me out of the special training class on his own authority. The moment I handed the mushroom over, Crane backed him, all wounded dignity, demanding I surrender it at once. I told them I was sorry to disappoint them, but I'd already eaten every last one. The sound the 2 of them made was not a word. It followed me back inside. Worn through by the day, I climbed a tree to sleep. A ninja rests where he likes, and I was up in the branches when a voice came drifting through the dark, calling my name. Grace, down at the roots, holding a covered pot, peering up into the black. "Up here," I answered, and she nearly dropped the pot. She'd come to thank me properly, she said, for the house I'd built her class, and she'd brought soup, left over from the party. I carved her a ladder on the spot so she could climb up and join me, and we sat on the wide branch passing the pot between us, the way we used to pass everything back when we were small. She dabbed my mouth with her handkerchief without thinking, then went pink about it. Then she got braver and quieter at the same time, and started to stammer out a question, a rumor she'd heard about me and a girl from another class, and a kiss. And in leaning back to brace herself, she leaned too far. The branch let her go. My hand was already there. I caught her out of the air and pulled her in, the whole slight weight of her landing across my arms the same as it had 100 times when we were children. "You didn't cry today," I told her. She hid her face against my shoulder and admitted, in a very small voice, that she missed those days. I told her I did too. "Then let me walk you home," I said. For old time's sake. I carried her the whole way, straight down through the residential quarter, and the quarter noticed. Faces appeared in doorways. The word reject traveled ahead of us, hut to hut, and under it, a rising, strangled chorus of why him? First the alchemist, now the saint. Why is he the only one they look at? Somebody stamped hard enough that a whole flimsy wall 3 doors down sagged and came down. Grace squeaked and begged me to put her down before anyone saw, which was a bit late, but she never once told me to stop, and she never lifted her face off my shoulder either. At her door, she slid down, red to the ears, thanked me for walking her home, wished me a good night fast enough to trip over it, and vanished inside. I told her good night and to sleep well, and went home myself. There was a scent at my door that didn't belong, something faintly sweet over the smell of wood and cold ash. My senses run sharp enough to track a thing like that, and it led me straight through my own doorway to the small hooded shape waiting in the dark. Sarah, Grace's martial attendant, wound tight as a spring and furious. She called me a scoundrel. She'd watched me catch Grace out of that tree, she said, with a move that belonged to her clan's secret art, a technique she'd trained her whole life for and still hadn't mastered. So how did a jobless nobody wear it like an old coat? Then she stopped talking and started throwing. I have no idea what her clan's secret art is supposed to feel like on the receiving end. From where I stood, it was slow. I slipped every throw she had, one after another, until she was heaving for breath and I hadn't moved my feet much at all. She threw herself at me in one last desperate lunge, overbalanced, and started to go down hard. I caught her by the waist before the floor could. That was the wrong thing to do. Her whole face went white, then a color I didn't have a name for. She was certain, dead certain, that I'd caught her on purpose, that I meant to work some forbidden art on her, bend her will and Grace's both to mine. I would never do that, I told her, and I meant it all the way down. Grace is a precious friend. I'd help her out of any trouble she was in. I'd never lay a hand on her, so relax. Sarah made a sound like a kettle. The blush came up so hard I half expected to hear it. She swore this was a mercy, that next time it would be a duel to the finish. And then she was gone out the window before I finished the sentence. The board flickered as I stood there alone. Level 6. A fresh 100 of dexterity. And a new trade waiting to be claimed. One I'd never seen offered before. Treasure Hunter. I took the new trade before I slept. Treasure Hunter, with a skill called treasure finding folded into it. And then I went out like a snuffed candle. I surfaced once in the dark and dropped back under. When I woke the second time, it was still black as midnight, so I rolled over to steal more sleep. And something about the dark felt wrong. Too flat, too complete. I went to the window. Someone had pasted a sheet of black parchment over the whole thing from the outside. I punched through it and daylight fell in on me like a bucket of water. Bright, high, late morning daylight. I was hours late, and I hadn't the faintest idea for what. I bolted out the door without breakfast. I came pelting up to the academy gate, and something on the wall snagged my eye before I could pass it. The banners along the top were all the same academy blue, all but one. A single black flag hung among them, and the moment I really looked, my new skill lit it up from clear across the grounds. That was no flag. Under a magic disguise, that was a flying dragon hide, a whole undamaged pelt off the phantom dragon called Black Storm, the kind of material a craftsman sees once in a legend. I didn't stop to wonder why it was flying over a school gate. I switched to ninja, went up the wall like it was a ladder, pulled the black flag down, switched to appraiser to be sure of what I held, and slung the priceless thing over my shoulder. Then I remembered I was late and ran. The whole first year was assembled in the courtyard, and Crane was up front in fine form, wrapping the morning orientation and gloating about a special lunch from the school's sponsors. He made a show of noticing I wasn't there. Such a shame Adrian was late, he'd simply enjoy my portion himself. Then, he announced, he'd nearly forgotten the important part. This year's student council president would be decided by a treasure hunt. He had hidden a rare prize somewhere on the grounds, and whoever found it would be crowned president and keep the treasure for their own. A flying dragon hide, he told them, magically disguised so cleverly that it could not possibly be found inside a week. He was so sure of it, he offered up his own post to anyone who managed it sooner, and laughed, because to him, that was the same as offering nothing. I picked that moment to jog in the gate, breathless, the black hide riding heavy on my shoulder, calling out that I was sorry I was late. The courtyard turned to look. Crane turned to look. I have never in my life heard a grown man make the sound the vice principal made then. He'd hidden the thing himself. He'd blacked out my window himself to keep me sleeping through it. And here it was, walking in the gate a full week early, on the shoulder of the one cast-off he'd built the whole game to shut out. I still didn't know what I'd won. I just knew I was holding it, and that a number nobody respected had found it for me before the contest even started. I still didn't know what I was holding, so I did the reasonable thing and carried the black scrap over to Vice Principal Crane and asked him, plainly, whether he actually knew what it was. He looked at it, and something behind his eyes came apart. He shrieked, this thin, strangled sound. His legs folded under him, and before he could stop his own mouth, he blurted the answer for the whole courtyard to hear, a flying dragon hide. Then he heard himself. I watched him try to shove the words back in. He scrambled up, went the color of old paper, and started insisting it was no such thing, just a filthy black rag, a disgusting scrap, and would I please take the revolting thing far away from him. Trash-suited trash, he said, and waved me off like I smelled. So I walked away with a flying dragon hide over my shoulder, formally handed over by the man who had hidden it. He didn't seem to grasp that if he'd accepted it from my hands, I would have won the council presidency outright. I wasn't about to remind him. I still didn't know the half of what I had. I only knew it had made a grown man scream twice in 1 minute, and that seemed like a promising start. I'd resigned myself to another lunch of nothing. My portion had a way of never arriving. When Grace found me and asked, like it was the most obvious thing in the world whether I'd share hers. She had a tiered lacquered lunchbox. I offered her the wild nuts I'd gathered the day before, and she lit up and traded me a piece of chicken, holding it out with a soft, "Here." I ate it. It was genuinely good, and I told her so. That was apparently a signal. Evelyn drifted over next and asked for a handful of the nuts. For alchemy, she said, entirely serious. And then, having secured her materials, fed me a piece of broccoli as though the two things were one transaction. A shadow fell across my shoulder after that. Sarah, hooded and grave as a headstone, pushed a sausage at me and informed me this was my last meal before the duel she'd promised, after which my life was forfeit. I ate the sausage. Her hand was very gentle for someone announcing my execution. Diana lost it. She'd come to drag Grace back to wherever saints were supposed to be, and instead, she was watching her own partner hand feed the enemy, and she said as much, loudly, to no effect. 3 of the Academy's so-called great beauties, taking turns putting food in my mouth on the open lawn. Around us, the yard came apart. Boys who'd never spared me a word made sounds I can only describe as wounded. Why him? Why the reject? I chewed and let them suffer. And somewhere in the middle of that ridiculous meal, quietly, I leveled up, and a new job clicked into place behind my eyes. Leather craftsman. I glanced at the hide over my shoulder. Convenient. Across the grounds, my old class was watching the same scene and taking it much harder. I could read the shape of it from where I sat on, and I'd hear the rest later. Wesley stood at the center of class 120 with that composed, lecturing tilt to his head, talking himself out of what his own eyes were showing him. First, he decided he was simply overworked, worn thin by the new environment, seeing things. When the sight of me being fed in the sun refused to go away, he built himself a sturdier lie. The hide I carried was a fake. The real flying dragon hide was still out there, unclaimed, waiting for a genius to walk out and take it. Marcus grumbled about his missing lunch and about the reject hanging all over the girl he'd privately decided was his. Cyrus stewed that I used to fetch and carry at his word, and now the whole school doted on me and swore up and down he wasn't jealous while being visibly nothing else. Silas, the scavenger of the group, flattered Wesley and swore a genius wouldn't need even a full day to claim the true prize. So Wesley made it a decree. No lessons, no meals, no rest until class 120 came back, holding the real hide. A sage's lesson, he told them. Those who do not work shall not eat. They believed him. That was the part that undid them. I only heard how it ended later, and even I didn't enjoy all of it. They searched the whole day. Grounds, perimeter, tree line, every corner of a hunt for a thing that did not exist, because I had the only one, and it was on my shoulder. They found nothing. By dark, they'd skipped every lesson and every meal. The building had locked them out, and they were somewhere well past exhausted and deep into starving. Then Silas produced his mushrooms. He'd gathered a whole cheerful batch from the forest earlier and offered them around like a hero arriving in the last act. Wesley, who had banned rest and food all day on principle, granted the feast. They were the blue poison mushrooms, the exact ones I had once stopped that same class from eating. Nobody remembered the reject's warning because the reject wasn't there to give it. It hit within minutes. The whole class went down clutching their stomachs. Someone gasped that they should call a saint or run for the infirmary, and Wesley forbade it. A battle wound was honorable, he said. Crawling to a healer over a bellyache would make them a laughingstock in front of the family he was so certain was watching his every achievement. So they lay in the dark and got worse, and were found collapsed at first light and carried in together. Class 120 was demoted from C to C-. Wesley wept over the rank and never once connected it to the boy he'd thrown off a stage. And I'll be honest, the justice of it sat clean, right up until I pictured the ones who'd only followed, sick and green in the grass, because their leader would rather they suffer than admit a single weakness. That part I didn't cheer. While they hunted a lie, I spent my afternoon somewhere warmer. I'd missed the morning orientation for being late. My window had a way of getting papered over in the dark, so I chose an afternoon elective instead, leathercraft. I loved the work. I'd just unlocked the job, and I happened to be carrying a legendary hide. No class in the school suited me better. This was the one. Crane was waiting to be small about it. He steered me to a corner and told me my assigned seat was the floor. I sat on the floor. I'd sat on worse. Then Ms. Fields came in, soft-spoken, round glasses, hair like a pale cloud, and announced that the leather side would be sharing the room with the sewing students. Grace was one of them. She spotted me down in the corner, crossed the room, and without a blink, dropped straight onto the boards beside me. Crane made a noise. He'd set out a throne of a chair for a saint, and the saint was sitting on his floor. He begged her up. "Then I'll sit right here too," Grace told him, bright and immovable, and folded her hands in her lap to prove she meant it. He held out for exactly as long as his nerves could bear a sponsor saint on the ground. Then, strangled, he allowed that I might have a chair after all. I got a chair. Grace beamed like she'd won a war, and in a small way, she had. The lesson had barely started when Crane found his real move. He announced that special training students couldn't borrow the school's craft tools at all. Then, graciously, he lent me exactly two things: a magic needle and a pair of magic scissors, and forbade me a single length of thread from anywhere in the room. I understood him at once. Those weren't ordinary tools. Only magic tools can even cut a flying dragon hide, which meant he knew precisely what I was holding, and he wanted me to gut a priceless material with nothing to stitch it back together, to waste it publicly in front of everyone. He even offered, sneering, to hand me a plain hide like the other students got once I'd shredded mine into ruin. Grace started to rise to argue for me. I waved her down. Ms. Fields fretted that a person couldn't craft with only cloth, a needle, and shears, and the class snickered on cue. "No thread?" I said, and reached for my stone knife instead of his scissors. "Then I'll make my own." I walked out the back door into the yard, and the whole class crowded the windows to watch the reject embarrass himself. There was snake vine growing along the flower beds, thick, tough, ropey stuff, the kind you grab in a pinch when you need a line. I cut a good length of it with the stone knife I'd napped myself, because the magic scissors were meant for the hide, and this was beneath them. Then I worked. I peeled the tough outer skin off the vine and split what was underneath into fibers, thin and pale and wet. I carried the bundle to the little pond and rinsed the sap out of them until the water ran clean, then laid them across a flat stone in the sun to dry. I stacked a quick fire stand out of twigs, struck a small flame, and passed the fibers over the heat, not to burn them, just to drive out the last damp and set the strands. And then I twisted, fiber over fiber, rolled along my palm and thigh, the way you learn once and never forget, until a thread tightened up that wouldn't snap no matter how hard I hauled on it. Then another, dozens of strands of it, high quality, coiled at my feet by the time I straightened up. Behind the glass, the snickering had died. Grace was cheering me on through the window, bright and certain, and Crane, I was told, had gone a truly remarkable color. I gathered up my thread and went back inside to do the part that actually mattered. I threaded the magic needle and set to work on the hide. The leather craftsman skill moved my hands faster than thought. Leather armor, the job called the technique, and it turned that black dragon hide into a coat under everyone's stare in a fraction of the time the work should have taken. When I finished, the thing was long and black and faintly glowing, and when Ms. Fields appraised it, her voice climbed a full octave. High quality. She said a working leatherworker might manage one such piece in a decade, and here was a first year holding one across his arm. The coat carried real magic in it too, a space inside 10 times its apparent size, and no weight at all to whatever I dropped in. Crane could not stand to let that stand. He snatched his tools back and announced to the room that the quality was thanks to his needle and scissors. Legendary treasures, he said, passed down through his family for generations. Ms. Fields knew better. Those had come out of the same supply cupboard as everyone else's. I let him keep the lie. I had the coat. The fickle half of the class decided the trick was the tools all along and drifted back to their seats, disappointed. Grace didn't. She leaned toward me, shy about it. "Please, teach me how to use a needle." So I did. "Keep your stitches even," I told her, "and pull to the same tension every time. And here's the real trick. Pour your feeling into it. If it's a gift, picture the person's face when they open it." She bent over her cloth with her whole heart in it, the tip of her tongue tucked into the corner of her mouth, and when she straightened up, she was holding a small heart-shaped patch. Ms. Fields nearly dropped her notes, because it too came out high quality. 2 in 1 afternoon. Grace stared at what her own hands had made like she couldn't believe it. I believed it. I'd watched whose face she was picturing the whole time. The next day, Grace brought the patch to me and pressed it into my hands, calling it her finest work and handing me all the credit for it. I sewed it onto the coat right over the breast. I didn't expect much. Stitching one finished item onto another usually holds the quality where it is or drags it down. This did the opposite. When I appraised the coat again, the number had jumped clean past 100, all the way to quality 109, into a bracket Ms. Fields called Royal Craftsman work, the kind you hear about your whole life and never actually see. The effects had grown with it. the tenfold space, and the weightlessness still. And now the coat mended itself and slowly healed whoever wore it. Grace went pink and explained, barely above a whisper, that the patch was her family's crest, a heart, that giving someone the heart emblem meant offering them your own. I told her it was incredible work, that she was a once-in-a-decade genius in her own right, and she made a small sound and looked hard at the floor. I meant every word about the craft. The rest of it sailed clean over my head, which I understand now was its own kind of cruelty, though I never meant it as one. Miss Fields asked me, almost pleading, to pick her class again next term, even though she had nothing left to teach me. I said I would. Then the bell rang for physical education. I owned a uniform and now a legendary coat, and not one stitch of gym kit, so I kept the coat on and walked onto the field in it. The others changed into their athletic gear. Grace came out with her pale hair tied back in a high ponytail, and across the whole width of the field, she caught my eye and waved. A big, glad, unguarded wave, like there was nobody else out there worth waving to. I lifted a hand back, and something warm went through me, plain and quiet, and out of nowhere, and right in the middle of it, I leveled up. I opened my status to find out why. There was a line on it I'd never seen before, a hidden skill tied to my jack-of-all-trades trait, the kind that only surfaces on a rare level and won't tell you what it does until you've leaned on it a while. And beneath it, a new job offered up. Martial artist, a combat class. I'd been a maker all week, shoved into a corner and called useless with my hands. And now, those same hands were being handed away to hit back. I took it on the spot. The job settled in and brought its skills with it. Karate arts, boxing arts, and a thing called 1-inch bomb, a strike that lands with everything behind it from almost no distance at all. My dexterity ticked up past 1300. I stood there in a legendary coat that carried a girl's heart stitched over mine, with a fighter's skills in my grip I hadn't owned that morning, and thought about how much the people who threw me away would have hated to watch it happen. They'd find out soon enough. They found out sooner than I thought, and it started with a man built like a wall telling me to punch him. The morning had handed me a new job. Martial artist, karate arts, boxing arts, and a strange one called 1-inch bomb. I was still turning it over in my head when the physical education instructor came out onto the field. Coach Nolan, a slab of a man, broader than Marcus, with a voice pitched to carry across a battlefield. He opened by telling us we were all going to die if we didn't learn to fight. Then he explained why. 2 spells ringed the campus, he said. One kept us from thirsting. One was called Repel, and it kept the monsters out. Starting tomorrow, the Repel spell would begin to fade. Tomorrow, monsters could walk into the residential area. That was why the class was mandatory, and why there'd be no warm-ups, only real fighting, because a monster wouldn't wait for anyone to stretch. I filed that away. Tomorrow, my house sat at the very edge of the forest, closer to the trees than anyone else on campus. Then he found me in the crowd. He'd heard about the celebrity from the discard room, he said, sneering the words so the boys around me would laugh. They did. Nobody, he told the whole field, would ever know the name of a washout. He waved me forward to demonstrate and offered to take my first punch with no guard up at all, a free shot. He said it the way you'd offer a child a turn on a swing. I stepped up. Behind him, a few of the women were cheering anyway, Grace loudest of them, calling my name like the ending was already written. I opened my status and moved the numbers. Deft body let me pour dexterity into whatever I wanted, and I wanted it in strength, so I poured most of it across. My defense cratered, health, magic, all of it thinning to paper, but my arm suddenly had a mountain behind it. I set my feet and put one body blow into his gut, just the one. Boxing arts, barely a step behind it. The coach left the ground. He went up and back and sideways all at once. A huge man turned into a thrown sack and skidded a good few meters across the packed dirt before he stopped. The field went dead silent. The boys who'd been laughing took a step back, then another. I decided I had probably moved a little too much into strength. Grace reached me before the coach even groaned. She ran straight past him, caught my arm, turned it over hunting for a scrape. "Where does it hurt?" she asked, and I told her nothing hurt, since I was the one still standing. She blinked over at the coach, folded on the ground like she was only now noticing he existed, and decided out loud that he was probably just tired. Then she went back to checking my knuckles. I asked if she'd watched any of the fight at all. She said she'd watched me, only me, in case I got hurt. The rest of the field might as well have been empty air. The other maidens hauled Nolan upright, and he wasn't finished. He announced, loud enough for the crowd, that the fall had been deliberate, an advanced floating body technique to bleed off the force, and that he'd prove it with a rematch. This time, he'd throw the punch, Fine by me. While he wound up, I moved the numbers again, every point I could spare out of strength and into endurance. Nothing about me changed that I could see. Underneath the skin, my body went hard as a paving stone. He hit me with everything he had, a full power swing from a man his size. It should have folded me in half. It did nothing. His fist met me and stopped like it had struck a wall, and he pulled it back, shaking his hand out and wincing. "You all right?" I asked him. He mumbled something about a play-dead technique, an elite move, going limp on purpose, and the maidens walked him off the field while he was still explaining it. Grace patted my arm one last time, to be sure I was whole. That was the lesson. Tomorrow, the monsters came, and I lived closest to the trees, so after class, I went home and got to work. I swapped martial artist for woodcutter and evened my stats out again, then took a stone axe into the forest. Great wood was soft and light and easy to drop, and it worked clean under a decent blade. By the time the sun began to lean, I had 80 long lengths of it felled, trimmed, and hauled back to the edge of my yard in a stack taller than I was. 80 lengths. It didn't feel like enough. Nothing would, with a barrier about to go quiet on my doorstep. I changed to carpenter and started raising a fence. It went up faster than it had any right to, post after post ringing the whole property. Then a gate hung square in the front of it. Earthquake-proof, fire-proof, rot-proof, the job told me, though I mostly cared that it was tall. And the moment the last board of the gate settled into place, the house and the fence and the gate all began to glow at once. Not a fire, a soft, even light rising off everything I'd built, like the ground itself had approved of the work. "No way," I said out loud, to nobody. An actual base. An old master carpenter had told me once how a base was made. You needed a building with a wall and a gate, and you needed your total level over 50. I'd always taken it as a story, the kind of thing that only happened to castles and kings. But somewhere between the coat and the fights and the felling, my total had crossed the line without my noticing. My little house on the garbage plot had turned into something the world had a menu for. The menu was humble. Level 1. Scale. Shabby single house. Population 1. A single skill called activity support that strengthened everyone standing inside the walls. It was the smallest base that had ever existed, most likely. And it was mine. The work bumped me up a level. My dexterity climbed, and a new job opened with it. Trapper. That was exactly what I wanted. I switched over, learned pit trap and wire trap, then swapped to stonemason just long enough to shape a shovel out of the yard stones. With it, I dug a pit near the path, lined the bottom with sharpened greatwood spears, and laid a lattice of thin branches over the mouth until it looked like ground. Off by the fence line, I strung a wire trap between a tree and a bent sapling, the kind that snatches an ankle and hauls a man up into the air by it. Every one of them I set inside the fence, not out. Grace visited, and she always used the gate and never once climbed anything, but I wasn't going to gamble her ankle on a habit. I hammered a sign into the middle of the yard where no one could miss it. Danger. Traps. Then I stood back in the last of the light and looked at a home that could finally bite. I heard the rest of it later, the way you hear about weather in another town. While I'd been driving spears into my yard, the school's leadership had been having the worst 2 days of their careers, and every hour of it was their own doing. It started with the coat. Vice Principal Crane had schemed to trap me into ruining that dragon hide, and the scheme had turned inside out in front of a full workshop. I'd walked away with a legendary coat, and Crane had walked away screaming, knocking Principal Barlow's marble bust off its stand on the way out the door. To claw back some dignity, Barlow reached for a prize. He took the plain needles and scissors Crane had lent me, ordinary school supplies, nothing more, became convinced they were priceless god items, and announced they'd be displayed at the Royal Museum for all the sponsors to admire. The museum's experts took one look and called them obvious fakes. That was 3 humiliations in a row. A coat scheme that made me legendary, a treasure that was a sewing kit, and a physical education coach launched across a field by a washout in front of the whole first year. The Pioneer Education Committee added it up and cut all 3 of them down a rank: Barlow, Crane, and Nolan. Public losses of standing and salary both. And then, while they were still nursing that, their monitoring board pinged. A student had founded a base. They swore the device was broken and ordered it fixed. They checked the map anyway, and the reading sat out in the forest, by the garbage dump, where nobody was supposed to live. They pulled the surveillance feed to prove themselves right, and found me stretching happily in my yard in front of a glowing house. Barlow's scream, I'm told, could be heard down the corridor. Reporting my base would have undone their demotion in a heartbeat. They couldn't do it. A discard room boy setting the fastest record anyone had ever seen. The old best was hundreds of days, and I'd done it in 2. was a thing their pride could not carry to the committee, so they decided a real student would do it instead. Faster, bigger, a proper wall around the whole residential district before Rappel died, a communal base grand enough to bury the shabby one in the trees. The next morning, they summoned Wesley. They offered him command of the whole project, and my old friend heard them out with that unhurried confidence he wore like a coat, then named a single price. Make him student council president when it succeeded, and he'd build them their wall. They agreed on the spot. He walked out of that office already the man in charge of a barrier he hadn't laid one stone of, chasing a title he was certain the work would earn him. I'd have told him, if he'd asked, that a promise is a very heavy thing to build on, but he didn't ask me anything, and hadn't in a long time. I slept better than I had in weeks. No fist rapping at my window before dawn, no face pressed to the glass. The fence had bought me a full night. I stretched, felt good about it, and went out to the yard to find two people caught in my traps. Sarah hung from the wire trap by one ankle, strung up between the tree and the sapling, turning slowly like a giant bagworm in a gray hood. When she saw me, she stopped struggling, and, with what dignity she had left upside down, mouthed the word help. "Sarah," I said, "in a man's yard again." I flicked a carved shuriken through the wire above her ankle and cut her loose. She landed, gathered herself, and crawled toward the gate, promising that our next meeting would be a duel to the death. I told her to please use the gate the next time she wanted to see me. She was already gone. The pit trap had the other one. Down among my nice sharp spears, untouched by any of them, stood the freshly demoted vice principal Crane, glaring up at me with pure loathing. I fetched a crafted ladder and lowered it in. She climbed out raging about a custom suit she hadn't finished paying off, now torn at the knee, and a salary that had just been cut out from under it. She sniffed that no discard room student could possibly have business with her, informed the class that today was a free development day with no lessons, and stormed off through the gate she should have used in the first place. I looked at my morning's haul, one rival and one vice principal, and felt the faint familiar twinge that leveling up by trapping people was maybe a little wrong. The level up itself unlocked the woodworker job, so the twinge didn't last long. "Right," I said. "Woodworker, it is." I had a stack of stored greatwood and a house with nothing in it, so I filled it. A table, 10 chairs, which was 9 more than I needed and felt right anyway. A toolbox for the mess of stone knives and carving blanks I'd been keeping in a heap. 4 beds. All of it came out high quality under the new job, smooth-grained and solid. The base felt the difference. It ticked up to level 2, its scale climbing from shabby single house to ordinary single house, and it handed me a new skill along the way, base expansion, which let me fold nearby land I'd cleared or claimed into the base itself. My fortress in the weeds was growing a floor plan. Then, my stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten, and a base doesn't stock its own larder. I pocketed a few shuriken and went out to find lunch. On the way to the forest, I passed the beginning of Wesley's empire. He stood up on a platform above a crowd of students, and the students were looking up at him the way our whole class once had. He called himself base committee chairman now. He told them they would all build the Great Wall together under his guidance, that once it was finished and counted as a base, they'd have nothing to fear when the repel spell faded, and that the wise thing to do was follow the wise man. He was very good at it. He always had been. I kept walking. I already had a base. He had a speech and a deadline, and I knew which of those held back a monster. I found my lunch, and something better than lunch, out past the pond. A girl stood at the water's edge with a bow drawn, aimed up at a bird crossing the gap in the canopy. She didn't belong to this country. Glossy black hair in a long braid, fair skin, a crisp white top over a vivid red skirt, cut in a style I'd never seen. The whole of her poised so perfectly, she looked like a figure lifted out of a painting. Then I stepped on a twig, and her shot went wide, and the bird flew on. She lowered the bow and stared into an empty quiver. "Sorry for spooking your shot," I said. She turned and apologized to me instead, which caught me off guard. It was her own inexperience, she said, not my footstep. She'd only ever practiced on targets that held still, and she'd wanted to bring back some game to lift the spirits of the people building the wall, and instead, she'd emptied her whole quiver into the sky. She said the last part like it shamed her to be seen. "Want a hand?" I asked, and started shaping a branch into something arrow-like. She watched me a moment, and then gently explained that an arrow couldn't be made of wood alone. It needed proper fletching to fly true. I nodded like that was news to me. Then I took a carved shuriken out of my pouch, sighted the next bird that crossed the pond, and threw it. The bird dropped. One throw, clean through it, meat, and a spill of feathers falling to the grass at the water's edge. She looked from the fallen bird to me and back, and asked how a person downed a flying target in a single throw, with a thrown blade, no less, when she couldn't manage it with a bow and a full quiver. Me? I said, gathering the feathers she could use for her fletching. I'm unemployed. She didn't believe that for a second, and she never gave me her name, and I didn't ask for it. But the way she was looking at me, like I'd quietly rearranged what she thought was possible, told me she'd be looking for me again. I handed her the feathers and thought about the day rolling in behind all of it. By nightfall, the repel spell would thin to nothing. Somewhere back at the school, Wesley was promising a crowd a wall he hadn't started. And out here, at the edge of the trees, I had a base, a fence, a yard full of teeth, and now a stranger who wanted to know how I did it. Tomorrow, the monsters came. On this whole campus, I was the only one ready for them. The feathers were still in her hand when I sat down and started making arrows. She had watched me drop a bird out of the sky with one thrown shuriken and gone quiet with the kind of awe I never know what to do with. So I gave her something better than awe. 10 straight lengths of forest stone, the feathers she'd been clutching, a little vine thread for the fletching, 10 arrows, done before the sun had moved a hand's width across the pond. Here, 10 times what you lost, I told her, holding them out. If it's not enough, I'll make more. She took them like they were made of glass. That was when I noticed the bow slung across her back, a Western bow, symmetric, both limbs the same, and a cheap one at that. She drew the way they draw in the Eastern country, though. Wrong tool for the hands using it. It bothered me more than it should have. So I found a flexible branch, stripped it, and bent it into an asymmetric shape. The lower limb short and the upper long, the way the Eastern makers do it. Strong vine for the string. I lost track of how long I worked. When I handed it over, she just stared. The bow, she whispered, was the exact form she'd trained with back home. The shape, the length, all of it. She said such a thing was rare even in her own country, and that she couldn't possibly accept it from a man she'd only just met. You'll insult me if you don't, I said. Now knock one and shoot. Her fingers were trembling. I could see it, the way the arrow shivered against the rest, the too tight grip. A better bow wouldn't fix that. Hold on, you're rattled. I kept my voice low and even. Take a breath. Settle your heart before you loose it. Not after, she breathed. Her hands went still. A bird crossed the clearing, and she loosed, and the arrow took it clean out of the air, mid-flight, a shot she'd been missing all morning. For a second, she didn't move. Then she went straight down onto her knees in the dirt, forehead nearly to the ground, and begged me to take her as my disciple. I asked her, a little helplessly, to please get up. She would not get up. She told me her name was Hannah, that she led the Shrine Maiden class, an all-female group from the Eastern country, and that she'd never had proper equipment or proper teaching in her life, and she wasn't leaving that spot until I agreed. A disciple's a bit much, I said. I can give you advice, though, when we run into each other. She took the word advice like a sacred vow, treated it as a trial I'd set her, a condition she had to earn her way through. Every correction I made only dug her in deeper. When she asked, in that formal, careful way of hers, how much tuition she owed her master, I nearly laughed. I don't need tuition, I said. Just make friends with Grace, would you? That landed somewhere I hadn't aimed for. She went still and told me, quietly, that no one had ever once asked her to make a friend of a rival, only to beat them. She said she would do it. She meant it like an oath. That was when the ground shook. A woman the size of a small door came crashing through the brush. Hannah's attendant, all armor and fury, roaring about, how dare I make her lady kneel in the dirt. Victoria. She did not ask questions first. She rarely does, I'd learn. I am not a fighter of large, angry women. I'm a coward about it, honestly. I told Hannah she could hunt birds fine on her own now, with the skill and the bow, and that there was nothing left to teach her today. And I slipped sideways into the trees and was gone before Victoria finished her sentence. On the way home, I found wild green onions growing in a damp hollow and pulled a good bundle. Back at my hearth, I threaded bird thigh and onion onto sticks and set them over the coals, with a pinch of the salt Evelyn had given me weeks back. The smell of it dragged an old memory up. A chef I'd worked under, back in my tavern days, catching my wrist before I could toss the onion roots in the scrap bucket. Wait, he'd said, those still have use. He showed me how to stand them in water and coax the green stalk to grow back out of the root you'd already cut. I'd forgotten I knew it until the smoke reminded me. I ate, and I saved the roots. Barren land or not, I thought, a man who can regrow his own onions never quite runs out. I set the roots aside to plant. The only trouble was water. I'd need more of it than I had, and soon. I heard the rest of it later, secondhand, the way I hear most things that happen when I'm not in the room. Victoria had cornered Hannah, still bristling, demanding to know who this ruffian was, guessing he must be Wesley, or some visiting hero, or a nobleman worth kneeling to. And Hannah, calm as a moon over water, told her the truth, that for the first time in her life, she had found a precious person, her master, her unemployed master. Victoria, they say, did not have a word to put to that. The next day, I went looking for that water. The coach's not thirst spell that had been keeping the class from needing to drink was thinning out, same as the rappel barrier. I could tell the barrier was going by the animals, rabbits, deer, more of them than I'd ever seen this deep, drifting toward a calm pond I'd never found before. Tomorrow, they'd have nothing keeping them off the residential district at all. I got to the water and realized I had nothing to carry it in. That's when the Prewitt brothers walked out of the reeds. 3 of them, mohawks, furs, spiked clubs, the whole barbarian class act. They told me the pond was their turf, their class's turf, and I should remember their names before they taught them to me. Somewhere in the blustering, they let slip they had a grudge against Wesley too. Small world. If you want to fight that badly, I said, I'll oblige. I switched to the martial artist job and closed the distance. 3 strikes, 1 for each of them, and all 3 were down in the reeds and not getting up for a while. Nothing dramatic. They just stopped standing. Then the brush exploded. The boar came out of it twice my size, tusks like scythes, and the little animals scattered screaming. The brothers found their legs fast enough for that, up a tree, all 3, jeering down that the washout was frozen stiff. I wasn't frozen. I charged it, and mid-stride I switched to the ninja job. When the boar dropped its head to gore me, I slipped past the tusks, caught them both, and used Windfang, a spinning throw that turned all that weight against itself. I whipped the whole animal off the ground and slammed it headfirst into the earth. The ground cratered. A wave went clean across the pond. It also shook the tree hard enough to spill all 3 brothers out of it, flat on their backs, staring up at me like I was something that ate men. The brothers scrambled up, wailing that I'd lifted a monster over my head and thrown it, that I was the real monster, and bolted into the trees. I let them go. The boar left good drops. Loin meat, a heavy hide, 1 thick tusk. I moved pond water into the crater with my carry bag, soaked the hide with bark to tan it, and dried it over a branch. The tusk I carved into a broad knife with my old forest stone blade, then wrapped the handle in a strip of the leather. From a length of the hardest wood nearby, I whittled a needle, threaded it with vine, and sewed the rest of the hide into 10 sturdy water skins, filled everyone at the pond, slung them home, and the load barely pulled at my shoulders. The coat saw to the weight, the way it always did now. Crafting eats my hours whole. It always has. I didn't mind losing that afternoon to it one bit. The warning hit me before I saw it. That sense in the back of my skull, the one stat of mine nobody respected, went off like an alarm the moment the district came into view. Then I saw why. A wall, an enormous one, thrown up around the whole residential area while I'd been out in the forest. 50 meters of unsplit logs, crudely lashed together and swaying, visibly swaying, in the wind coming off the plain. Wesley stood at the foot of it like a man posing for a monument. Council president now, running the thing as his flagship. I went straight to him and told him to stop, to bring it down before it brought itself down on top of everyone. He looked at me the way you look at a dog that's learned to bark a word. The sway, he explained to the crowd more than to me, was intentional. A seismic isolation structure, designed to disperse vibration. In the hands of a wise man like himself, the whole thing would be settled by morning. The students around him laughed. They laughed at the special training dropout, the 1-point intelligence washout, presuming to lecture a sage about engineering. I didn't argue with the laughing. Arguing was time, and I could feel I didn't have any. I'm not hoping it falls, I said to him, flat. I'm telling you it will. He'd already turned his back. So I stopped talking to the men who wouldn't listen and went to the ones who would. Grace's house sat closest to the wall's shadow. I felled great wood and threw a reinforced fence up around it, fast, the joints tight, bracing it the way you brace a thing meant to take a blow. Grace didn't ask me to explain. She just started calling her class to shelter, flustered and loud, announcing to anyone in earshot that she was Adrian's #1 disciple, and they'd be fools not to move. Hannah arrived at a run and stood beside her, steady where Grace was frantic, telling her own class in that formal voice that whatever her master said was beyond doubt, and that Grace was her senior disciple besides. Her attendants were less convinced. Diana crossed her arms and demanded proof, said if the wall didn't fall, she'd have me demoted to a horsebone. Sarah added that it'd be a horsebone too poor even for soup stock. I let them snipe. Sniping was fine. Sniping still had them moving toward the fence. Only 3 classes listened, Grace's, Hannah's, and Evelyn's. The rest looked at the dropout building a fence and stayed put where the wise man had told them it was safe. I got everyone I could inside the line. I I'd sworn once, out loud, that I'd never let anything happen to Grace. The fence was me keeping that. That was all it was. It came down at dusk. There was a sound first, a long groan of timber that ran up the whole 50 meters of it, the logs grinding against each other as the sway went too far and stopped coming back. Grace's hand found my sleeve. From the upstairs window, we watched the top of the wall lean out over the district, hang there for one impossible breath, and let go. Then it wasn't a wall. It was a landslide. 50 meters of great wood folding down all at once. A wave of logs and splinter and dust rolling across the plots below with a roar you felt in your teeth. The whole district vanished under it. Grace made a small sound. Hannah didn't make any. The wave reached us and stopped. My fence took it. The whole surge of timber slammed into the line I'd braced, and the braces held, the logs stacking against it and going still, and not one splinter reached the house. When the dust thinned, Grace's house stood up out of a sea of broken wood like a ship on a flooded field. The one dry spot in all of it, the one place I'd made ready. Inside the fence, everyone was breathing. Every single one. People caught outside it were hurt. I found that out later, in the count of who the teachers carried to the infirmary. Told to me after, in numbers. Never a thing I had to watch happen. No one died. The blessing magic laid over the grounds saw to that much. But the harm was real, and all of it fell on the plots where they'd laughed instead of moved. I didn't feel like laughing back. I want to be honest about that. I stood at the window over a district Wesley had buried after I told him it would happen, and what I felt wasn't triumph. It was cold and quiet, and it came down to one thing I didn't bother to say out loud, because the whole school could see it now for themselves. I'd warned him, and I'd built the one wall that held. I wasn't there for what came next. I heard it pieced together afterward, and none of it surprised me. The teachers ran the rescue. The blessing magic meant no student was lost. And then Barlow stood up in the wreckage and made very sure the blame landed nowhere near his office. The whole disaster, he announced, was Wesley's doing alone. His own judgment, his own wall. There was no evidence, he said, that the administration had ordered any such thing built. Wesley's memory was simply confused. Crane echoed every word half a beat behind him, shrill and eager, the way he always does. They dropped Wesley's class 2 full ranks, all the way to the bottom. Every class that had needed the infirmary lost a rank too. And Grace's class and Hannah's, the ones that had sheltered, they raised. Grace refused it to their faces. She said they couldn't accept the merit, that they'd only followed the instructions of a certain person, one they deeply respected. And she got as far as the first sound of my name before Crane's screech cut clean across her. Hannah tried too, said the credit belonged to him, not to them. Barlow smothered it. Every word in and out of that academy ran through the two of them, and they made certain my name was not one of the words that got out. The sponsors had watched the whole rescue through their viewing glasses, I was told. Rich, well-born people who'd seen exactly whose fence held. They said nothing either. A commoner rising is not a thing their sort allows to be seen. Wesley wandered the ruin of his own project like something scooped hollow. His glasses kept sliding down his nose, and he kept not fixing them. He muttered the number to himself. 2 ranks, 2 ranks, as if saying it enough times would make it untrue. He passed a knot of girls who didn't bother to lower their voices. Liar, they called him. Fraud. He heard all of it. Then a letter reached him from his father. He'd have known that seal his whole life, and known it only ever carried praise. This one carried 3 words, disgrace to the family. He read it, and something in him that had never once bent finally cracked. He sank down into the rubble, insisting to no one that he was a sage, that a sage does not fail, that this had to be a nightmare, and that whatever he was not that unemployed Adrian. His class was rubble, his name was mud, and even then, sitting in it, the only shape his hurt could take was hating me for being right. I came back the next day hauling a log over my shoulder and walked straight into the tail end of it. Wesley had dragged himself back to his own class, class 120, and was busy trying to hang the whole collapse on me. His classmates had stopped clearing debris to listen. He told them I'd broken the wall out of jealousy of his success, spun it whole cloth, and the crowd, being a crowd, started to lean his way. Then he pointed at Cyrus and told him to take his fireball and burn my house to the ground. Cyrus wouldn't. He said it flat in front of everyone, that I would never wreck anything, that he knew me better than that. He got right to the edge of something else too, some reason of his own, blurting that I'd once done him a reel, and then biting it off before it landed. Whatever it was, he wasn't torching my house over it. He said that part plainly. Wesley couldn't stand it, that Cyrus would trust me over a sage. It lit him up, and he drew back a fist to strike him. Marcus caught his arm, the same Marcus who'd thrown me off a stage months ago. He held Wesley's wrist and told him, in that heavy way of his, that he'd backed him a long time, but he'd never stand and watch him hit a classmate who hadn't asked for it, that a man's fists were for men who wanted the fight. Touch Cyrus, he said, and he'd put Wesley in the trash himself. That was the crack finishing. Wesley's own muscle, done with him. Cornered, Wesley fell back on the only thing he had left, his title. He raised his hands and threatened the whole class with some great magic, told them to kneel or be blown away, and started to gather it. I happened to be walking past right then with a log on my shoulder. I turned to set it down, and the end of it came around and caught Wesley square and put him head first into the garbage pile with only his legs left waving in the air. "Oh, sorry," I said. "Thought I bumped something." Turned out to be Wesley. I hoisted the log again and kept walking. Behind me, Cyrus tried to say something. Got out a strangled half of a word. Thanks, maybe. Mangled past use. And I didn't quite catch it. So I lifted a hand and told him, yeah, I got it, later. When I glanced back, he'd turned away, ears red. The words stuck somewhere he couldn't reach them. The wall was rubble. The sage was in the garbage. And out at the edge of the trees, I still had a base, a fence, and 10 water skins to plant an onion with. Nobody up on that stage knew my name yet. They'd get there. I showed up to help clear the rubble. 2 good arms, a coat that could shoulder a fallen log like kindling, and nothing better to do with either. I lasted about a minute. Barlow spotted me first and went stiff, the way a man goes stiff when the last person he wants to see walks into the room. He said my being here was inconvenient in all kinds of ways, and none of the ways had anything to do with lifting. Crane took the cue and picked up the tune, shrill about it, waving me back toward the tree line like I was a stray dog that had wandered in off the road. Back to the garbage dump. Shoo, shoo. That was the whole conversation. I looked at the logs I could have moved and the crews who weren't moving them, and I let it go. You can't force a man to accept a hand he's decided to hate. So I turned around and walked home to the one plot of dirt in this whole academy that was mine. If they wanted me gone from the district, fine. I had a field to think about. The first thing I built was a planter. Leftover great wood, joined tight, the grain still holding that faint warmth the material always keeps. I set a green onion root in it, poured water from a leather flask, and told it to get healthy and grow strong. Talking to a root, that was the state of my social life. Then the world chimed the way it does when something changes, and I'd hit level 11. A new job had opened under my hand. Magic farmer. Rare, the notice said. A production job that braided farming into magic. I swapped into it the way you try on a coat you're not sure fits, and 3 skills settled into me at once. Open field cultivation, so my eyes could read a plant the way they read wood grain. Wind farming, and something called breath of light. My sharpened sight caught them right away. Wild sweet potatoes, half buried at the yard's edge, small and poor and stubbornly alive. I whittled a hoe from greatwood, and it came out better than the material had any right to be. My dexterity, dragging its quality up past what my hands even understood. I meant to clear a small plot. I cleared 20 paces by 20. Then I called the wind. Wind farming turned the tilling into nothing. The spirits came off my palms and combed the whole field open in one long breath, the soil folding over itself in neat black rows, while I just stood there and watched. I planted one sorry little cutting in the middle of it. Then I got cocky. I threw everything into breath of light, every last point of magic in me, 1,800 of them, gone in a single reckless pour, because I wanted to see what it could do. Light spirits sank into the ground. The cutting shuddered, and then the vines came up like something waking hungry, faster than any plant should ever move, boiling out across the whole field and past it, spilling green into the greatwood forest, until I couldn't see where my land ended and the trees began. I dropped to one knee, wrung dry, staring at a runaway harvest I had absolutely not planned. Turns out I was less self-sufficient than I thought, and a lot more powerful. Bad combination. Good day. When the vines finally settled, I pulled a cluster loose, 10 small potatoes, and the appraisal in my head put them higher than the wretched cutting deserved. The job bonus and my dexterity doing the quiet work, lifting the whole thing up out of the dirt it came from. I built a fire outside the house and buried them in the coals. I did not expect the smell to be a weapon. It rolled off that fire thick and sweet, and it reached into the forest and came back dragging 3 people behind it. Grace, Evelyn, and Hannah drifted out of the trees, half hypnotized, following their own noses like they'd forgotten how to steer. What is that? Grace managed, and she wasn't really asking me so much as asking the air. I split one open and handed it over. "Since you're here, eat." Grace hesitated with it steaming in her hands. Is it really all right? Still hungry? I was already reaching for another. "I'll bake more. Eat as much as you want." That was the end of the manners. Evelyn pressed a hand to her cheek and said she felt like she was melting. Honestly, melting. Hannah made a sound that was almost a crime and swore it gave her shivers. They went through a dozen between them before anyone remembered why they'd been walking to my house in the first place. Grace set her hands in her lap, suddenly quiet. "The truth is, we came to talk to you about food, Adrian. The district was starving. The cleanup had eaten the whole supply chain. No crews spared a haul, no stores getting through, and the shelves in the shelters were going bare." I looked at the field behind me, the one still trying to swallow the forest. "How much do you need?" They didn't have a number, so I gave them one, gestured at the whole overgrown sprawl of it. 2 tons, near enough. Take it." The three of them just stared at the field, then at me, like I'd said something in a language they didn't have. Harvesting a field I'd grown by magic went about as fast as growing it had. I worked the rows with the farming skill, left a share of seed potatoes buried for the next planting, and piled the rest until 2 carts groaned under the weight of it. Evelyn put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled up a knot of male students to push, dry as ever about the state of them. Then Grace came and stood in front of me, with her eyes shining and her voice gone thick. "Adrian is really, really amazing," she said, and before she could work herself up into a full speech, I reached over and patted her head to shut it down gently. It did not shut down gently. It made her go pink to the ears and forget every word she'd lined up. Hannah watched this with her hands folded and her chin lifted, formal as a shrine door, and I could tell she was filing it away for later. Grace, recovering, mumbled something at the ground about how she wouldn't have minded a pat of her own, then caught herself saying it out loud and got twice as pink. I loaded the last of the potatoes and told her not to worry about it. The food was going where it needed to go. That was the whole of it, as far as I was concerned. The 3 of them, walking those carts back toward the district, had other ideas. I just didn't know it yet. The district was worse than the girls had let on. Half of it was still buried, and the cleanup wasn't crawling because people were lazy. It was crawling because of the rules. Evelyn laid it out flat as we walked. Each class was only allowed to clear its own plot. So every crew just shoved its rubble sideways onto the next class's ground, and that class shoved it back. And the whole ruin sat there getting pushed in circles by a yard of nobles who'd never held a shovel before this week. She said she honestly couldn't tell anymore which part was the disaster and which part was the dump. Grace's house was the exception. My fence had held it through the collapse, and now the yard behind it had become a shelter, packed with students who hadn't eaten properly in days. When the carts rolled up and the smell hit them, the place erupted. Cheers, hands reaching, the whole starving crowd surging toward the food. Grace stepped in front of the carts before a single potato moved. So did Hannah, and the 2 of them made one thing very clear to that hungry crowd. The food came from Adrian, and nobody ate until they'd thanked him for it. I'll be honest, I meant to sleep through most of it. I found a wall to lean on and closed my eyes. I got woken by a girl bowing so low her hair nearly touched my boots. She thanked me for the food, and then she asked me, earnestly, like it was a right, to please say the word, to say she was permitted. I blinked at her, said sure, you're permitted, and she ran off clutching her potato like I'd knighted her. That was when I noticed the shape of what the women had built. Up in the shelter window, half in shadow, Sarah sat watching the whole line with those half-lidded eyes. "By Lady Grace's orders," she said when she caught me looking. "I'm making sure everyone gives proper thanks." She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She was enjoying it plenty, so it went. The polite ones came and bowed, and I told them they were welcome and waved them through easy. And then came the other kind. A boy shoved to the front and told me to hurry up and give him his permission, then curled his lip and reminded me, loudly for the crowd, that I was nothing but a special training class reject, a dropout, trash. I looked at him standing there hungry in front of the food I'd grown, and I let the quiet sit. "Who's the dropout begging for food now?" His face did something complicated. I nodded at the cart, unbothered. "Ask properly, and I'll allow it." He held out for a breath or two on pure pride. Pride is a thin blanket on an empty stomach. He asked properly. I let him eat. A handful stormed off swearing they'd never bow to trash. I didn't chase them. Hunger did that for me. One by one, they came slinking back through the dark, and the words had changed. "Please, Adrian, I'll starve." And one by one, I made them ask like they meant it, and then I fed them too. Every single one of them. The whole school that had thrown me off a stage, lined up in the lantern light, learning my name one thank you at a time. I didn't gloat. I just handed out potatoes and let the reckoning cook itself. The school was still closed for the cleanup, but the morning assembly ran anyway, out in the yard. I stood off to the side where they liked to keep me, apart from the main body, close enough to be made an example of. Crane took the platform with a stack of paper slips and a smile I didn't trust. Everyone was to receive a special ticket bearing their own name. Obligation tickets, he called them, standard in development schools. The way he explained it, each ticket was a debt with teeth. Hand yours to someone, and they held one command over you, one order you had to obey. Refuse an order and the ticket's worth dropped. Refuse enough times and it became worthless paper. Anything that broke the law or school rules didn't count. He passed them out down the ranks. When he got to me, he stopped, and his smile got wider. He held one up for the whole yard to see. It had my face on it, drawn ugly on purpose, and stamped across the value, 0. He'd used mine as his little demonstration, he said. Garbage, so he'd borrowed it. Then he flicked it into the dust at my feet and let the laughter roll over me. Look at that ticket. Face value 0. Worthless from the start. Who'd ever want a ticket from that special training reject? I bent down and picked it out of the dirt without a word and put it in my pocket and said nothing at all. Crane wasn't done. He pulled a cloth off the big magic board. A new asset ranking, he announced. It would rank every class by the tickets they'd collected, but here was the hook. Tickets from your own class didn't count. Only ones you'd been given by other classes. A grand cash prize for the first class onto the board. A special prize for the first student to gather a gold ticket. And there were gold tickets. 2 of them, awarded for heroism in the disaster, to Grace and to Hannah. The yard buzzed, everyone doing the math at once, everyone wondering who'd charm those 2 golden slips away from the heroines. I did the math too, and I understood exactly what I was looking at. This wasn't a bully. This was the whole academy turned into a cage. Every debt, every command, every ranked number, all of it wired to keep me at 0 and locked out. A net, laid over all of us, and stitched tightest right around me. Then assembly ended, and Grace and Hannah didn't scatter with the crowd. They came straight for me. They stopped in front of me and bowed in unison, in front of everyone, and held out their whole ticket booklets, gold slips and all. Please, Adrian, take all of my tickets. Grace's voice didn't shake at all. Hannah bowed lower. I beg you, master, please make full use of everything I have. The yard made a sound like it had been punched. The 2 most celebrated girls in the school bowing to the reject with the 0 ticket. Crane came apart at the seams. He shrieked at them to stop, spitting that word again. Garbage, garbage. They couldn't hand their wealth to that special training garbage. Grace rounded on him without flinching. He'd said himself, she reminded him, that they could spend their money to show gratitude, and she owed Adrian her house and her life. These tickets were repayment, nothing more. Hannah folded her hands and said hers were tuition. She took Adrian's guidance every single day, and her thanks were beyond words. Crane, cornered by his own rules, choked out that they could give 1 ticket each, 1 at minimum face value, and no more. The minimum face value turned out to be a small fortune apiece. The board lit. It climbed, and it kept climbing, and then it landed. First place, special training class. Crane made a noise I've never heard a grown man make, and lunged for the board with a chair over his head, and Coach Nolan caught him by the collar mid-swing, growling that the thing was on loan from the Royal Institute, and he wasn't about to explain a smashed one. Crane hung there in his grip, and dissolved into open sobbing, blubbering that if he'd only kept the garbage's ticket at 0, he'd have been shut out of everything. It got better. A breeze crossed the yard, and a ticket sailed off it into my coat pocket, light as a leaf. Evelyn stood a little way off looking entirely innocent. My ticket isn't paper, she said to no one. It's wind. It blows where it likes. That's all. The board ticked up. Then Sarah, of all people, dangled a ticket in front of me on the end of a vine like a fishing line, half-lidded eyes daring me. Come on, take it if you can. I took it before the vine finished swinging. Her eyebrows went up at the speed of it. The board ticked up one more time. I'd walked into that yard stamped value 0, deliberately fenced out of the whole economy. I walked out of it the richest student in the school. Their cage sprung shut on the men who built it. I pieced the rest of it together later from what leaked out of that office in the days after. The tickets were never about fairness. Barlow and Crane had cooked them up together, sitting in the dark stewing over the fact that my little forest base had already climbed to level 2, while their whole district still lay in rubble. They had no prizes to hand out, no reconstruction to show, and a nobody in the trees whose name kept spreading no matter how hard they buried it. So Crane's clever idea was the tickets, a way to reach past the limits on what a teacher could order a student to do, to command them directly, wrapped in the pretext of a school policy. And the command he wanted most was simple. Get Grace's and Hannah's tickets into the administration's hands, and then order the 2 of them to stay away from me. Keep my own ticket at 0 so I'd be locked out entirely. Strip me of the only people who'd stayed, and let the base rot with no one in it. Barlow liked the plan. He talked about setting fire to my base and leaving me utterly alone. That was the trap the girls had just detonated by bowing in the yard. They'd emptied the whole thing in one move and never even knew the shape of what they'd broken. The next morning, Crane had to stand up in front of everyone and hand out the very prizes his scheme was built to prevent. The first class onto the ranking board, mine. The first student to hold a gold ticket, me. 2 awards, both with my name on them. He couldn't do it. The students told me later he stood there with the award list in his hands, shaking, and then he stuffed the paper into his own mouth and chewed it rather than read my name out loud. A grown vice principal eating the announcement. The yard went dead silent watching him do it. It was the last thing he did as vice principal. The king, it turned out, watched the school's broadcasts. He'd seen the whole assembly, the bowing, the cage, a man eating paper to spite a boy who grew food for the starving, and he was not amused. Word came down through the education committee the same day. Crane dropped 2 ranks, cut to acting vice principal, pay docked, family name dragged along with him. He went to Barlow on his knees begging, and Barlow, who'd been every bit as deep in the plot the night before, looked at him like a stranger and let him fall. A scapegoat costs nothing when you've already spent him. I heard he wept about his family's tradition, generations of them holding that post. I didn't feel much about it either way. Men who build cages shouldn't be shocked when one closes on them. I went home to the only place that had ever paid me back in kind. The field was already pushing up green again from the seed I'd left. The house stood over it, solid, mine. And the moment I stepped inside, the world chimed for me. Level 12, and a new job unfolding under my hand. Not another farming skill. Divine carpenter. The top-tier production job, the notice said. The sacred one. The peak of the whole building tree. I stood there in the doorway turning that over. A booklet full of other people's trust in my coat and a divine trade newly settled in my hands. And I let myself feel exactly one clean breath of it. Then I remembered the shape of that net in the yard and the office in the dark, and I stopped smiling. Crane was demoted, not gone. Barlow was untouched and already looking for the next hand to play. And somewhere past the tree line, the golden boy whose wall I'd watched come down was licking his wounds and hating me harder for it. None of it settled, none of it finished. The cage was still live, still built around me. All they'd learned was that they couldn't strip my people away, so the next thing they reached for would be bigger. Let them reach. I had a field that fed a school, a job the world called divine, and a name that was spreading faster than they could bury it. Whatever they were building to cage me, I'd build faster. I always had. The night I hit level 12, the world handed me a job it called divine carpenter, top of the whole trade, the rank so high that only the men who hold it are allowed to raise temples and shrines. Their buildings are supposed to carry real power in the grain. I read the words on my status, weighed them for about as long as it takes to weigh a plank, and set the whole thing back on the shelf. I'd never had much use for gods. A job that only mattered if I bowed to some heaven I'd never met could wait. So I was oiling a chisel when Grace and Hannah stepped out of the trees. Hannah came first, the way she always did, braid down her back, hands folded, already halfway into an apology before she'd said a word. "Master, it shames me to ask this of you," she said, and stopped, and started again. "But my class has nowhere to live." Grace filled in the rest before Hannah could tie herself in knots over it. The school had opened a purchasing department, she told me, a counter where you traded tickets for goods, level up potions, debris hauling, whole houses, built to order, at prices only the top classes could touch. "The rich classes are racing ahead," she said, twisting her sash between 2 fingers. "And the poor ones sink. Hannah's class has been crammed into my family's home for days." I didn't mind, truly. But then the vice principal came. Her mouth went flat. Crane had ordered them off Grace's land and told them to buy their own house from his new counter, on ticket debt they'd spend years paying. I set the chisel down. "If it's building," I said, "I'll do it." "You didn't have to ask twice." Hannah bowed so deep her braids swung. Grace just beamed at me like I'd said something clever. I already knew what I wanted under it. High-grade dawnwood for the frame. Quality 24, the kind that doesn't warp. A basket of fine rose petal blossoms besides, though I kept wide to myself. I loaded it all onto the cart. The cart was heavy. It stopped being heavy the moment Hannah's attendant took the other end of it. Victoria was tall, black hair wound into a hard topknot, a 2-handed sword slung across her back like she'd been born wearing it. She lifted the load without a grunt and set the pace. And she watched me the whole way with the flat suspicion of a guard dog deciding whether to bite. She didn't say a word. That was fine by me. Crane was already at the plot when we arrived, and he hadn't come alone. Behind him, a crew of grown tradesmen in matching leather aprons were laying out timber, the Guild Divine Carpenters, the ones who trade on the name, the only builders the world lets raise anything holy. Crane's face split when he saw me. He asked, loud enough for the whole yard, what a jobless boy imagined he could possibly do here. I didn't answer. I was unloading Dawnwood. One of the carpenters swaggered over and blocked my light. He wanted to know if I actually meant to build Lady Hannah's home myself, standing next to real craftsmen. When I didn't rise to it, the whole crew closed in and started talking about a divine match. A contest, they said, judged by the heavens themselves. The loser's house gets struck by lightning, the loser's builder along with it. Quit now, one of them told me, before you're burned off the map. I heard about half of it. I was checking a joint. Did you say something? I asked, and knelt to true up a corner post. That did more damage than any answer could have. The crew went red. Crane shrilled that if my work came out shabbier than theirs, he'd smash it flat on the spot, and the guild threw themselves back into their build like men with something to prove. Behind me, I heard Victoria let out a slow breath. Not sure what set them off, I said to no one, but I'll take the fire under them. Then I built. I'm not going to pretend it was a fight. It wasn't. The guild had 5 men and a plan. I had 2 hands and dexterity past 500, and a job called divine sitting quiet in the back of my skull, whether I bowed to it or not. Posts went up. Beams seated home the first time, every time. The frame stood before the carpenters, had their second wall braced, and by the time the sun leaned west, I was fitting the last shutter on a finished house. Quality 41, braced against quake and fire and rot, with a calm woven into the timber so a tired person would sleep the moment they lay down inside it. Grace kept pace with me the whole way. She'd dart in to blot the sweat off my face with her handkerchief. Great work, let me get that, and dart back out with water, pink to the ears the entire time. Across the plot, one of the guild men was so busy staring that he set his own thumb under his hammer. Hannah pressed both hands to her mouth. It's incredible, she got out, and that was the most words she'd managed all day. The carpenters had gone quiet in a different way. One of them pinched his own cheek, hard, to check he was awake. They'd come to teach an amateur a lesson, and the amateur had roofed a house while they were still arguing about foundations. I wasn't done. A shrine maiden doesn't live behind an ordinary gate. If a plain gate won't do, I told Hannah, let's give you something proper. She nodded like I'd promised her the moon. I crushed the rose petal blossoms I'd hauled all this way and rendered them down to a deep vermilion dye, 60 units of it, red as a struck heart. I stained lengths of greatwood, let them drink the color, and raised the pieces into a towering shrine gate, crossbeam over twin pillars, the whole thing weatherproof and humming with a quiet that made you want to lower your voice near it. Quality 74. I don't think anyone in that yard had ever stood next to a number like it. That was the thing that broke the guild. Not the house, the gate. A sacred structure raised by a boy with no license and no god. On ground they'd claimed as theirs. Their pride couldn't hold it. Crane started screaming that only the guild was permitted to build anything holy, that this was blasphemy, that it had to come down. He hauled up an enormous timber mallet, taller than he was, and the carpenters grabbed their own, and the whole pack of them charged the gate together to beat it into splinters. I stepped back and watched them come. The sky was clear. I want that understood. Not a cloud in it. One long, unbroken sweep of blue with the sun still gold in the west. Nothing overhead, nothing coming. Then it came anyway. A single bolt of lightning fell out of that empty sky. Not a flicker, not a fork, one white column, straight down, so bright the whole yard went colorless, and my ears rang before I understood I'd heard anything at all. It didn't touch the gate. It didn't touch me. It fell on the men swinging their mallets at a shrine, and it fell on the rival house they'd been raising, and it took both like a verdict written and signed. The sound arrived a heartbeat late and shoved every one of us back a step. When my eyes cleared, the guild's build was a black ruin, and the men who'd charged were down in the dirt around it, hurt, alive, but hurt, scorched, senseless, sprawled where the strike had thrown them, Crane among them with his mallet fallen out of reach. The ground where they lay had opened into a shallow crater, the earth still smoking, like something enormous had reached down and set one finger against them and pressed. The whole yard had gone silent. Somewhere behind me, a voice cracked out that heaven was angry, that this was punishment, and then a dozen voices took it up. Nobody moved toward the fallen men. Nobody dared. And my shrine gate stood over all of it without a mark, the vermilion still wet and gleaming, catching the last of the sun. I'd told Grace I had no use for gods. Standing there in the ringing quiet, I started to wonder if one of them had a use for me. The sky knitted itself back together, and where it cleared, a ladder of light came down. I don't have a plainer way to say it. A column of soft gold, wide as the house, poured out of the high air and settled over the roof I'd built, and it stayed, steady, warm, like a held breath. Grace was already on her knees by the crater's edge, wringing her hands over the downed men. "The judgment lightning," she said, voice thin. "Even a saint can't heal wounds from that. Someone fetch a healer. Get the school nurse. Hurry!" Runners scattered. The men would live. They'd just carry it a long while. Hannah wasn't looking at them. She was looking up into the light with tears standing on her face, and then she dropped to her knees before the house and pressed her forehead to the ground. "Heaven has recognized it," she whispered. "This house, there is no doubt now. It is a true shrine." When she rose, she didn't say anything else. She just crossed the yard and put her arms around me and held on, shaking a little, calling me master into my shoulder. I let her. My hand found the top of her head and patted it twice. An old habit worn smooth by years of doing the same for Grace, back before any of this. Over Hannah's braid, Grace watched us with a look I didn't have time to name, halfway between glad and something else. I'd come to build a house. I'd built a place people would kneel in. I could live with that. I didn't get to enjoy the quiet. A hand closed on my collar and hauled me off behind the plot. Victoria. She spun me around and put her face close to mine, and every ounce of that guard dog suspicion had turned into open accusation. "You," she bit out. "Who in the world are you? Ever since you appeared, Lady Hannah speaks of nothing but you, a jobless boy who raised shrines and drew lightning down on his enemies." She wasn't buying it, and she wanted me kept well away from her lady. I could have argued. Instead, I looked at the sword on her hip. A practice blade, school store cheap, the grain already splitting. "Hold on a second," I said, and crouched by the cart. I had a length of ogre wood left and my great boar's knife on my belt. I carved while she stood over me, demanding answers, and I let the blade do the talking. A clean wooden sword, quality 19, the edge trued to a line. I held it out to her hilt first. "Try it." She snatched it like she meant to prove a point. She spun on the boulder beside us and swung once. One furious, full-shouldered cut, the kind she'd probably used to snap 100 cheap swords over the years. The boulder fell apart, two clean halves, rocking on the grass, the cut face smooth as glass. Victoria froze with the wooden blade still out at the end of her arm. She looked at the stone. She looked at the sword. She looked at me. "Impossible," she breathed. "A wooden sword. That cuts rock. Rock splitting is a swordsman's whole life's dream." Her hand tightened on the grip, like she was afraid it would vanish. "It's beautiful. Not bad, right?" I said. She caught herself scowling again out of pure reflex. "Why give me this? What are you scheming?" The scowl couldn't hold. "Answer me." "I never thought of you as an enemy," I told her. "I just figured out why you want to protect Hannah so much. Take care of it, all right?" She named it right there, the rock-splitting sword, and I carved the name into the wood while she watched, and something in her shoulders came down for the first time all day. Then her pride caught up with her. She dug a slip out of her armor and pressed it hard into my hand. An obligation ticket, 100,000 denomination, her own face stamped on it. "Take it," she said, ears going red. "I won't be in your debt." And quieter, softer than any warning she'd given me yet. "Don't get too close to Lady Hannah." Then she was gone, sword cradled in both arms like a newborn. I looked at the ticket in my palm. Crane had built that whole system to keep me at nothing, and here was another one of the things landing in my pocket without my asking. The cage they kept building around me was a strange sort of cage. It kept paying me. I leveled on the walk home, 12 to 13. Dexterity jumping from 580 to 680 in one clean step, and a new job unlocked with it. Tamer. I liked the sound of that. A house is a fine thing to have. A friend that walks on four legs and hears things in the dark is better. I switched over and went looking. The animals wanted nothing to do with me. Every rabbit and fox in the Great Wood took one look and put a tree between us. Wary of hunters, all of them. So I did what I do. I built. Springy branches, strong cord, a bird trap trued up to quality 20 in about the time it takes to tell it. I set it, waited, and caught a fat little meadow bird by the leg. It looked at me. I looked at it. I reached out to tame it, felt the taming slide right off, and the bird wriggled loose and shot up into the branches, where it sat and chirped down at me in a way I chose to take personally. Charm. That was the stat the whole job ran on, and mine was sitting at exactly 1, everyone's favorite number for me. So I opened my status and did the thing I always do. Jack of all trades let me move points in bulk, and I moved them in bulk, 3,000 of them, straight into charm, draining every other stat I owned down to a single point apiece. My health, my strength, everything but my dexterity flattened to 1. Charm at 3,001. I want it on record that I only wanted to hold one bird. The forest disagreed. The ground started shaking first, low and wrong. And then it came, every animal in the Great Wood at once. Rabbits, foxes, deer, birds, in a screaming spiral overhead, boars, things I couldn't name in the dark, all of them charging straight at me with their eyes gone wide and shining and full of helpless, thunderous love. That, I said, backing up, is not what I meant to do. They hit me like a warm avalanche. I went down under a mountain of fur and feathers and adoring weight, somewhere at the bottom of it still holding a 100,000 ticket I never asked for, in a forest that had just decided I was its whole reason for living. Crane was face down in a crater. Wesley was somewhere past the tree line, nursing whatever was left of him, still hating me from a safe distance. The net they'd built to hold me down was still out there, still drawn tight, still waiting. None of it could reach me at the bottom of that pile. I'd build faster than they could fence me. I always had, right after I convinced 11 deer to let me stand up. It took me the better part of an hour to convince the deer to let me stand up. The rabbits had climbed into my lap by then. The squirrels came down the trunks in a gray stream. A pheasant settled on my head like I was a fence post, and something small with far too many legs decided my collar was home. 3,000 charm had made me the single most beloved man in the forest. Being beloved by an entire forest, it turned out, meant I could not so much as scratch my nose without a chorus of adoring eyes watching me do it. So I opened my status and fixed the thing I'd broken. Jack of all trades let me pour points from one place into another, and I'd poured too hard. I pulled charm back down from 3,000 to 101, spread the rest across the stats I'd drained to nothing, and watched the world go quiet. The pheasant lost interest. The squirrels remembered they had somewhere to be. The deer wandered off to graze like I'd stopped being the sun. 101 was livable. The animals still liked me. They just no longer worshipped me. A fawn stayed. Round-eyed, unafraid, it pressed its nose into my open hand, and when I tried the taming skill on it, a small heart of light bloomed over its head and faded. After that, it sat when I said sit, stood when I said stand, and flopped onto its side when I told it to roll over, pleased with itself either way. A few rabbits fell in behind us. I skipped once across the clearing, half to test them, and every animal in the line skipped with me. Fawn, rabbits, a very committed duck. For a boy who'd spent a year with no one to talk to but his own tools, it was a ridiculous little parade. I let myself enjoy it. Then I walked into a boulder, and the boulder stood up. It wasn't a boulder, it was a bear the size of a cottage, twice my height at the shoulder, thick dark fur over a body that blotted out the light, with hard little eyes and a long pale scar dragged clean across its chest, the master of the forest. Every animal behind me went flat to the ground at once. It moved faster than something that size had any right to. One paw scooped me off my feet and lifted me high into the air, and its mouth swung open wide enough to take my head. I reached for Jack of all trades, for the body skills, the strength, anything, and nothing answered. The skill simply would not fire. I hung there in a giant's grip with no power at all, waiting for teeth. I got a tongue instead. It licked me. It licked the whole side of my face, top to bottom, and then it pushed its enormous head against my chest and made a low rumbling sound that shook my ribs. Not a killer. A very large animal that had never once been treated gently, deciding it liked me. I stopped bracing and put my hand flat against that scarred chest. When I used taming, the heart of light that bloomed over its head was the size of a shield. The bear set me down as carefully as if I were made of glass, then sat, folded its huge legs, and sat upright, paws in its lap, exactly like an oversized stuffed toy someone had left in the woods. "Mark," I told it. "How's that sound?" Mark lifted one paw and thumped it against the dirt, delighted. When I turned for home, he ducked his shoulders so I could climb on, and I rode him back to my clearing with a fawn and 4 rabbits trailing behind. I'd walked into that forest alone. I came out with a friend the size of a barn. 4 men were waiting at my gate. I knew 3 of them, the Prewitt brothers, the pond thugs, loud in their patched furs, still wearing the neck braces from the last time things had gone badly for them. The 4th was new, a huge slab of a man wrapped in bear hide. Iron claws bolted over each fist, and the brothers kept calling him Boone the Bear Killer, like the name alone should make me kneel. I signaled Mark to hang back behind the tree line and walked up on my own. Boone spread his arms and made a long speech about it. The shape of it, filtered through the brothers whooping him on, was that he skinned bears for a living, that my hide would make a fine addition, and that this was payback for what I'd done to his little friends. He held the iron claws up to the light so I could admire them. I admired them. "Nice claws," I said. "Which shelf did you buy them off?" That landed harder than any punch. The brothers went red. Boone bellowed something about earning his name in blood. which is a strange thing to shout while wearing gear you clearly picked up in a shop. All 4 of them rushed me at once. Mark came out of the trees. He reared up behind me to his full standing height, blotting out the afternoon, and roared. One flat wall of sound that rolled across the yard and stopped 4 grown men mid-stride. The self-styled bear killer took one look at an actual bear and forgot every word he'd ever said about skinning one. They didn't fight. They ran. All 4 of them scrambled straight up the tallest tree at the edge of my land and clung there, wailing, the great boon included, packed into the branches like frightened birds. Mark ambled over and gave the trunk a shake. Just one. Easy. The way you'd knock apples loose. The tree shuddered and the whole crew came down in a rain of fur and neck braces, hit the ground, and did not get up to try again. They picked themselves up only to run, tripping over each other all the way to the gate and gone. Not one of them threw a single punch. The bear killer, chased off by a bear, without so much as a scratch to show for it. Mark sat back down and looked at me for approval, so I scratched him behind one enormous ear and told him he'd done well. A bear that size deserved a proper house. I dug with my forest stone shovel, and Mark dug beside me with paws built for exactly this. And between us, we carved a deep den into the bank, roofed it with reinforced greatwood so it would never cave, and I carved a slab of board and set it over the mouth. Mark's house. He crawled straight inside, turned around 3 times, and stuck his head out grinning, if a bear can grin. That was when Grace arrived and froze at the edge of the yard like she'd walked into a wall. She didn't come closer. She ducked behind a tree instead, pressed both hands to her cheeks, and started murmuring to herself in a rush she plainly didn't know I could hear. I couldn't make out the words at that distance, so I nudged my dexterous body skill to sharpen my ears and caught it clean. Something about how I looked even more handsome today than usual, and how she couldn't possibly face me like this. And oh, what was she going to do? I stood there holding a shovel, genuinely puzzled. I'd hauled trees, tamed a bear, and chased off 4 men, and I did not think any of it had made me better looking. Then it clicked, the charm stat. 101 wasn't just moving the animals, it was leaking into how people saw me too. Grace was blushing at a number. That didn't sit right. She should be comfortable around me, not ambushed by a stat I'd left dialed too high. So I reset it. Right there, before I went to her, I dropped my charm all the way back to 1, my own natural, unremarkable number. Whatever advantage it gave me, I wanted Grace looking at me and seeing me, not a spell. Then I walked over. The moment she saw my face settle back to ordinary, all the tension ran out of her shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping out from behind the tree. "For a moment, you looked like a different person. I must have imagined it." I told her nothing was wrong and there was nothing to apologize for. She started to say something else, that she liked me either way, no matter how I looked, then caught herself halfway and waved both hands and insisted I forget she'd said anything. To rescue her from it, I brought Mark around. Her mouth fell open. She'd heard a traveling showman swear once that even seasoned professionals couldn't tame a wild bear, that they all used tame-bred ones and called it the same. And here was one, bowing his great scarred head to sniff at her sleeve. After that, the afternoon just unwound. Mark scooped us both up and set us on his shoulders and walked us in slow circles, Grace laughing with her hands knotted in his fur. He lay down and let us bounce on his belly, like it was a trampoline someone had upholstered in a bear, and the 2 of us jumped until we were breathless, and the fawn watched us like we'd all lost our minds. I hadn't heard Grace laugh like that in years. I'm not sure I ever had. We watched the sun go down, leaned back against Mark's chest, all 3 of us worn out and content. Grace thanked him properly, one hand on his fur, and told him she'd dreamed of playing with a bear since she was a little girl and had never once thought it would really happen. Mark rumbled and let something like happy little puffs of steam curl off the top of his head, which I decided not to think about too hard. I noticed her white robe. It was wrecked, grass-stained, dirt-smeared, dusted head to hem in bear fur. "Grace," I said, "your robe. It's covered in fur and dirt." She looked down at it and didn't seem sorry at all. Her sister had told her once, she said, that a saint's white robe was made to get dirty from being close to people, that a clean robe meant a saint who kept her distance. And then she went quiet and pink and said the last part almost too softly to catch, that getting it dirty beside the person you love was a saint's greatest happiness. I opened my mouth to answer, and then I saw them. Above her head, rising slow into the dusk, a whole drifting cloud of little heart-shaped bubbles, dozens of them, welling up and floating off one after another, plain as breath in cold air. I'd seen the same shape bloom over the fawn, over Mark, over an animal I'd tamed, not over a person. A tamer wasn't supposed to be able to read a human heart at all. I rubbed my eyes. The hearts were still there. I didn't say a word about it. Some things you sit with quietly until you understand them. But I sat there against the warm side of a sleeping bear, watching the girl who'd spent her one miracle on me trail hearts into the sunset. And for once, I let myself not have an answer. Rebuilding in the district had gotten far enough along that classes were starting up again, so I pulled on my coat and headed for school. I passed Mark's den on the way. He was curled up inside, dead asleep, one paw over his snout, snoring loud enough to stir the leaves. I stood at the mouth of the den a moment and decided against waking him. Let the master of the forest sleep in. He'd earned it. Evelyn had set up under a wide tent, a small cauldron simmering in front of her, and the usual cluster of admirers ringed around trying to keep everyone else out. They tried to keep me out too. She waved a hand without looking up. "It's fine," she called. "Let him through." She was opening a potion shop in the residential district, she told me. A real one, marked with a dark violet flower over the door. Then she reached over, plucked a small tuft of fur off the collar of my coat before I could ask, and dropped it into the cauldron with a sweet root and a mushroom. The mix hissed and settled into something clear. "Hold still a second," she said, and by the time I'd asked what it was, she was pressing a small stoppered vial into my hand. "Whirlwind voice," she called it. One drop and my voice would ride the wind. Someone 50 paces off would hear me as if I stood at their shoulder. The catch, she added with a grin, was that everyone else inside those 50 paces heard it just as loud. I asked how much. "No charge." She capped it with a wink. "The material came off you. Just come by when the shop opens." I thanked her, tucked the vial into an inside pocket, and thought no more about it. A friend's gift on a slow morning. I had no way of knowing yet how badly I'd need it. I didn't make it to the gate before Vice Principal Crane pounced. He was all oily courtesy about it, draped an arm my way, and insisted, in that wheedling voice, on personally escorting me to a class I was required to attend. When I asked which one, he only smiled wider and steered me along, going on about how special training students were too dim to pick their own lessons, so when a teacher ordered them somewhere, they went. There was a plan running under all that politeness. I could feel it closing like a hand. He walked me to an open yard, fenced with pens and stables, rows of students already seated, each with some small pet at their feet. The teacher swept in a heartbeat later on a wave of her own theatrics, coat flaring, and introduced herself as Ms. Dawson. "Good behavior earns a pat," she announced to the whole yard. "Bad behavior earns extra duty. And today, a pet battle. So show me what you've got." I raised my hand and said I didn't have a pet. Crane had been waiting for exactly that. He produced with enormous ceremony a filthy gray sewer rat crammed into a tube too small for it, squeaking in distress, and presented it to me as a great personal favor. A reject and a sewer rat he brayed to the class. A perfect match. The students laughed on cue. I looked at the little thing wedged in that tube, wretched and shaking, and the first thing I did was work it loose and let it breathe. It sat in my palm, trembling. Jewel, I'd call her later. Just then, she was only a small frightened animal someone had used to make a joke. Ms. Dawson, to her credit, cut Crane's fun short. No pet meant she'd lend me one, she said, with cleanup duty as the penalty, though she'd cancel it if I showed her something worth seeing. Something worth seeing. Fine. For a pet battle. I'd want my charm up. Just a little. Just enough. So I reached for Jack of all trades and began to nudge the stat higher, slow and careful, one hand steady. Then Crane laughed. He did it right at my shoulder, a sudden bray of it, timed to the exact instant my focus balanced on a knife's edge, and the number slipped and shot straight to the top. Charm maxed out. 3,000 all at once. Again. Every pet in that classroom lost its mind. They tore free. Every leash, every cage, every arm, and came for me in one surging wave. Cats, hounds, birds, lizards, a badger, things I couldn't name. Every animal that yard held abandoned its owner in the same breath and buried me under a living, squirming tower of adoration. The students stared, stricken, watching their loyal companions climb over each other to reach the reject in the dirt. Somewhere above the pile, I heard Crane's laughter change, no longer mocking, delighted. And I understood, with the calm you only get when you're pinned under 30 affectionate animals, that this class wasn't a lesson. It was a stage he was building for something, and this humiliation was only the first plank of it. A mandatory class he controlled, matchups he chose, a rat in a tube today, and worse, waiting behind it. Wesley was still out there past the tree line, quieter than he'd been in weeks. Too quiet. Crane didn't scheme this cheerfully on his own. Somewhere, the two of them were setting a trap with my name on it, and the net that had been drawing tight around me all season was reaching for its last knot. None of that could reach me under the pile either. But I filed it away. The potion in my pocket, the bear asleep in his den, the laughter that was a hair too well timed. Whatever they were building, I'd see it coming. I always had. Right after I got about a dozen very devoted animals to let me up. It took the better part of a minute to talk the last of them down off me. I found the charm stat in my head, 3,000 maxed, ringing across the whole yard like a dinner bell, and I brought it down, past 1,000, past 100, down to a number a person could stand under. The living tower of fur and feathers on top of me went loose all at once. A goat unhooked its chin from my collar. 2 rabbits rolled off my chest. One small gray shape lingered at my shoulder a beat longer than the rest. The sewer rat I'd let out of that tube. Then she poured down my sleeve and vanished into the straw. Everything else drifted back across the yard to its owner like none of it had happened, blinking, wondering how it had got there. I sat up in the dirt and breathed. Crane came storming across the packed earth before I was even on my feet, flapping his olive sleeves at the animals as if he could shoo the whole morning back into its box. I didn't have to hear the words to know the shape of them. Filthy creatures. That reject. He kept his voice pitched for the students and the visitors along the fence. All offended dignity. All cleaning up a mess he was pretending he hadn't made. He'd been the one whose too well-timed laugh cracked my focus and set the swarm loose in the first place. He tidied it now, like a man who'd never touched it. Then, something hit me from the side and lifted my boots clean off the ground. Miss Dawson had me around the ribs before I could brace. That teal coat of hers a blur of gold buttons, squeezing hard enough that the yard tipped sideways. "Wonderful," she said into my ear, loud enough for the back rows. "I have never seen a student so loved by animals. Your penalty is forgiven, every scrap of it, and you have earned the finest head pat there is." I managed something like a wheeze. She took it as agreement and set me down at last, beaming, patting my hair flat with a gloved hand while I found my balance again. Crane didn't like being upstaged. He drew himself up tall and thin and reclaimed the yard with an announcement, and this one he wanted heard. The class tournament would begin at once. A special prize for the winner, a bounty, coin from the Academy's own purse, posted and witnessed. He said it the way he said everything, oily and pleased, like generosity was a costume he'd put on for the visitors along the fence. I watched him say it, and I filed it away. Crane didn't give anything away for free. If there was gold on the table, it was there because it drew a crowd. And a crowd was what you wanted watching when you meant to be rid of someone in front of everyone. But I didn't know that yet, not fully. I only felt the small cold thing turn over in my chest and go quiet. They walked us out to the arena. It was a real ring, packed dirt scraped flat, colored sand banked in the corners, a board at the edge with the matchups chalked up for anyone to read. Tents stood in a ragged crown all around it, the kind they threw up for a school festival, canvas snapping in the heat. Students filled the rail. Along one side, in the shade, sat the visitors Crane kept glancing at. Sponsors. The people the whole school was for sale to. I found my own name on the board and followed the line across to see who I'd drawn. It didn't say a name. It said, special guest. I'll admit I felt something almost like interest. A guest meant someone from outside, someone I hadn't already beaten or bored. I braced for something worth watching. Then he came through the gap in the tents, and the interest drained straight out of me. Wesley. He walked out onto the dirt the way he walked everywhere, like the ground was grateful. The star sage now, the school's brightest, a pale sage's mantle thrown over the blazer, and every eye on the rail turning toward him. The last time I'd been close enough to see his face, he'd been grinding a little carved pendant under his heel on a stage. My pendant. The one I'd sat up nights making for him, back when I still thought the word friend meant something when he said it. He looked at me across the ring now with a small pleased smile, like we were old friends who'd both come a long way, and he was glad to see how far down I'd gone. I waited for the old ache to come up. It didn't. Somewhere in the last few months, it had cooled into something quieter and harder, and I just looked back at him and counted the exits. Beside him, on a short leash, walked a panther, sleek and black, low to the ground, shoulders rolling, golden eyes that swept the rail once and made the front row go quiet. It moved like water poured downhill. The students found their voices again in a rush. A black panther, top of the class among beast pets. Even a professional would struggle to tame one, and he'd done it as a student. The admiration came off them in a wave. "It's you," I said, flat. I couldn't help it. "I didn't know you had any tamer training," he answered, "and I'll spare you the performance." He told the ring the beast was his own catch, found in the forest, tamed by his own hand, and he told it smiling, feeding on the sound the crowd made back at him. I didn't believe a word of the finding or the taming. Wesley had never tamed anything in his life. He owned things. The panther's ears flicked toward him and then away. It didn't lean into his hand. It didn't sit when he shifted the leash. It watched the crowd and it watched me, and it held itself like a spring wound one turn too far. That was when the small cold thing in my chest finished turning over, and I saw the whole shape of it. A pet battle isn't a duel between animals. I'd learned that much in the last 2 days. In the ring, a beast is allowed to go for the opposing owner, not just the other pet, the person standing behind it. So this was never a match. You don't smuggle a killer into a school. A wild black panther doesn't wander into a student tournament by accident, on a leash. On the one afternoon, the reject is forced into the ring. Someone brought it here. Someone with the authority to slot a special guest onto the board and wave an outside beast past the gate and call it a lesson. I looked at Wesley holding a leash he couldn't control, and I looked at Crane at the edge of the ring with his hands folded and his eyes bright, and I stopped needing anyone to explain it to me. This was the end game. The whole back half of the year had been a slow net. The obligation tickets, the debts dressed up as support. The rules bent one notch at a time to fence me in, to make me small, to make me leave. It had never worked, because you cannot fence a man who builds his own walls. So they'd stopped trying to cage the reject. Now they meant to remove him. An accident in the ring. A beast that got away from its handler. A tragedy the school would mourn in public and toast in private. And no one on that rail would ever be told the leash had been meant to slip. The betrayal and the debt cage, the two things that had been chewing at me all year, had finally become one move, and it was standing across the dirt with golden eyes. Wesley must have read my face, because he lifted his chin and delivered the speech he'd clearly been saving. I won't perform it for you. It came down to the same note he always played, that he and I were nothing alike. Different job, different name, different family, different money, different everything, and now different beasts most of all. He said it the way a man reads a receipt out loud, proud of every line. He said his panther most of all. Then he gave the signal. I saw his hand drop and the leash go loose, and the panther came off its haunches low and fast, that black weight pouring across the dirt toward me, golden eyes fixed on the space where I stood. I didn't run. Running is how you die tired. I turned my head to the one person in that ring who'd treated me like a student instead of a stain. "Ms. Dawson," I said, "may I call my own pet?" She blinked. Crane started forward, mouth open, some objection already forming. But she was faster and she was louder, and she threw a hand up between us and told the whole ring to let the boy call his pet, that this one was a genius, a world-class tamer in the making, and she'd not have a match without both sides on the field. I didn't wait for Crane to argue it down. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat and brought out the little vial Evelyn had pushed into my hand for free, brewed from a tuft of my own fur-lined collar. Whirlwind voice. One drop carried a call 50 paces. And further, she'd said, everyone in range hearing it whether they wanted to or not. I'd filed it away that morning without knowing what it was for. I knew now. One drop. That was all it took, and all I could spare. I thumbed the little stopper loose and tipped the vial against my fingertip until a single bead of it rolled onto my skin, cool and bright as struck glass, and I touched it to my throat. The whole gamble balanced on one thing, that a bear asleep in a den a mile of forest away would hear his name and come running before a panther crossed the last of the dirt between us. The panther was 3 strides out. I filled my chest, and I called across the whole grounds, my voice carrying farther than a voice has any right to, out past the tents, past the fence, past the fields, all the way home. "Come on, Mark." For a moment, nothing. The word rolled out over the arena and hung there and died. The panther kept coming, and the crowd, which had been holding its breath, let it out in a jeer. The reject, calling for help that wasn't coming, shouting a name into an empty field. A sewer rat couldn't touch a panther. Someone laughed. And what was he going to do? Whistle up another one? Wesley smiled wider. He thought he'd already won. He thought the field was empty. He didn't know what I'd found in the forest. The ground answered first. It came up through my boots before anyone heard a thing. A low tremor in the packed dirt, a shiver in the soles of my feet, the colored sand in the corners of the ring trembling into little ridges. The jeer on the rail thinned out. Someone stopped laughing mid-breath. Then the sound arrived. Not a roar yet, a rhythm. Something enormous running flat out and getting closer. Each stride a drum hit, rolling up out of the forest. And with every one of them, the whole arena flinched. Cups rattled off the visitors' tables. A tent pole leaned. Birds went up off the far roofs loose in a black scatter. The jeer that had been so proud of itself a breath ago came apart into a low, uncertain murmur, then into nothing at all, as 3,000 pounds of answer bore down on a field that had just finished laughing at me. The panther broke its charge and skidded in the dirt, ears flat, golden eyes snapping toward the tree line. The far row of tents blew apart. Canvas tore up the middle and went sailing, poles snapping like dry reeds. And through the ruin of it came a wall of brown, Mark, 3 meters of scarred forest master at a dead run, shoulders like a landslide, that pale old scar dragged across his chest, coming for me the way he'd come home every night since the day the forest gave him to me. He hit the edge of the ring and reared, and he blotted out the sun. Then he roared. I have stood under a lot of loud things this year. Nothing was this. The sound went through the arena like a hand sweeping a table clean. It flattened the jeering. It flattened the awe. Students went over the rail backward. The visitors in the shade forgot they were important. Crane's careful folded hands came apart, and he stumbled into the man beside him. And Wesley, the star sage, the boy who owned things, the boy who'd stomped my pendant and called us nothing alike, stood alone in the middle of his own trap with a leash he'd already dropped. His smile gone somewhere I couldn't see it, staring up and up at the thing that had answered a name he'd laughed at. The panther crouched low and stopped being a weapon and started being an animal a very long way from home. Everyone in that ring had spent the afternoon deciding what I was: a reject, a sewer rat, a joke with a coat. They'd been so sure of it that not one of them had wondered what a boy loved by every animal in the forest might have found out there. Now they knew, and not one of them was laughing. Mark came down onto all fours between me and the ring, the ground jumping under his weight, and put his scarred shoulder to my chest, and turned to face them all. Mark came down onto all fours between me and the ring, and for one whole breath, nobody in that arena moved. Then everybody moved at once. The near rail went over, not climbed, gone. A whole row of students pouring backward off it like water off a table. Somebody screamed the word bear, and the word did the rest. Trainees who had spent the entire morning laughing at the reject, and his coat became one panicked animal, all elbows and open mouths, trampling the colored sand in the corners to put one more body between themselves and 3 meters of scarred forest master. I couldn't blame them. Up close, Mark blots out the sun. His shoulder came to my chest. His head was a storm cloud with teeth, and the low sound rolling out of him you could feel in your own back teeth from 50 paces off. He's mine. I pitched it flat and loud, over the top of the noise. He's my pet. Stand still, and he won't so much as look at you. Nobody stood still. So I did the only thing that has ever worked, which is to make the monster boring. I laid my hand flat against the side of that enormous head and I scratched, the way you'd scratch any dog behind the ear, and told him he'd done well, that he could stand easy now. The far tents were nobody worth worrying about, and Mark, 3,000 pounds of the thing every beast in the forest steps around, leaned his whole weight into my palm and whined and thumped that ridiculous stub of a tail twice in the dirt. You could watch the scream die in the crowd's throat. Terror running into confusion. Confusion running into the front edge of something none of them had a word for. See? I kept my hand where it was and let them look their fill. Gentle. Come here, Mark. He patted a slow half circle around me, snuffling at the coat pocket where I sometimes keep a bit of dried apple, and the whole front of the stands sat frozen, watching the reject scratch a mountain under the chin. From the judge's box, I heard the theatrical intake of breath that meant Ms. Dawson had recovered first. From the ring's edge, I heard nothing at all, which was Crane, and which was worse. That was when I heard my name from the wrong direction. Not the stands, the competitor's gate. 2 people came through it at a dead run, and neither of them runs. Grace had her white saint robe gathered in both fists, and her silver hair coming loose of its circlet, out of breath in a way I had never once seen on her, chest heaving, face gone pink to the ears. Hannah was astride behind, black braids swinging loose, straw sandals slapping the sand, one hand jammed to her side. Ha! I finally found you, Adrian. Grace got out, and then she saw the bear and did not slow down by so much as a step. Hannah folded at the waist, hands on her knees, still fighting to be proper with no air left to be proper with. Sorry to keep you waiting, master, she managed. They had heard me. That was the piece I hadn't counted on. 1 drop of Evelyn's potion on my throat, and I'd thrown my voice across the whole grounds to call one bear. And the call had gone everywhere. and the two people who always come when I call had dropped whatever was in their hands and run the length of the academy to reach me. Wesley did not care for that at all. I heard him before I turned to look. That clean, carrying voice of his, aimed at the stands now instead of at me, telling anyone who would listen that this proved everything, that no Raject drags the Academy's saint and the shrine girl across half the grounds without some filthy hold on them, some threat, some leverage. He'd built an entire crime out of two friends being winded, and he was selling it hard. I didn't answer. There's no answer to a man who looks straight at loyalty and can only see blackmail. I noted two things instead. His hands weren't half as steady as his voice, and the leash wound around them had nothing on the end of it anymore. Ms. Dawson cut across all of it. She'd climbed onto the judge's box, teal coat flaring, eyes lit up like it was her name day. "Oh, this is a grudge match!" She clapped her gloved hands together, delighted. "I am fired up. Both beasts on the field. That's legal. That's beautiful. Pet battle. Ready?" Her arm chopped down. "Go!" And nothing happened. Wesley snapped his order at the panther. I caught the word attack riding the front of it, sharp and certain. The black panther looked at him. Then it turned its head and looked at me instead. Golden eyes, slow and unbothered. And it did the single most humiliating thing a weapon can do to the hand that holds it. It lay down, right there in the churned dirt, in front of the sponsors and the bracket board and the entire gossiping school. That sleek killing thing folded its legs beneath itself, set its chin on its paws, and yawned, wide. Pink tongue, white teeth, bored out of its skull. I felt the whole shape of the trap change under my feet. I'd read it wrong all morning, exactly like everyone else. We had all looked at a black panther on a short lead and seen a tamed beast. But a tamed beast comes when it's called and strikes when it's told. And this one would do neither. And the reason it wouldn't was standing over it going red in the face. Wesley had never tamed a thing in his life. He'd found a frightened animal a long way from home, and he'd cowed it, leaned on it, heard it, drilled it, until his raised hand meant pain, and it learned to flinch on cue. And a creature that only obeys fear obeys nothing at all the moment something bigger walks into the yard. Mark had just walked into the yard. Wesley couldn't take it. I watched the whole plan die in his face, and I watched him refuse to let it. The panther wouldn't move, so he would make it move. He stepped in over the animal, and he struck at it. A short, vicious cut of his hand, the gesture of a man who has always fixed disobedience with pain, and never once kept another tool in the box. And in the half second that hand came down, I think, for the first and only time all day, Wesley finally understood what he'd been holding. Not a servant, not a weapon he owned, a cornered thing he had ruled for exactly as long as he'd managed to stay the biggest cruelty in its small, terrified world. And he had just, in front of the entire school, made himself that cruelty one more time. At the precise moment, it had found something it feared less than it hated him. The certainty drained out of his eyes all at once, the way water goes out of a cracked cup. The panther came up off the ground. I won't tell you what a forest cat does the instant it stops being afraid. The crowd saw a black shape, a pale mantle, and then a great deal of very fast motion, and Ms. Dawson was already up and shouting for the field wardens. And by the time anyone's eyes caught up to it, it was finished. Wesley was down. The wardens had him onto a stretcher, and off the sand inside a minute, pale, not talking, but breathing, carried out through the very gate his saint and his shrine girl had just run in by. I heard the sound Crane made from the judge's rail. He'd spent the whole morning so sure of how this ended. Somewhere in the last half minute, the ending had turned clean around and started walking back toward him. And the noise that came out of him wasn't a word, and he didn't try for another. Then it was just me and a panther and a ring gone dead silent under a hard white sun. The black panther stood alone in the middle of the ring with its sides heaving, and it was afraid again. And a frightened thing that has just learned it can fight back is the most dangerous thing on any field. Ms. Dawson called my name, low and urgent, and told me to get back, that you cannot tame another tamer's beast, that it simply is not done. The skill won't take on an animal already bonded to someone else. It slides right off. Everyone knows it. She wasn't wrong about the rule. She was only wrong about this animal. It had never been bonded to anyone. There was nothing there to break. Hold, I told Mark. He sat, 3 meters of patience behind my shoulder. Then I walked out into the ring. I didn't rush it. I've spent enough hours around scared animals to know the one thing you never, ever do is come at them fast and tall. So I came slow, and I came low, hands open at my sides, coat hanging loose, chin down. And I did the single hardest thing there is to do with a killer standing 10 feet off. I stopped being afraid of it. I let every last thread of the fear drain straight out of me, down through my boots into the dirt. Because the thing could smell fear the way I can smell rain coming. It had been drowning in fear its whole short life. Fear was the one language anyone had ever taught it, and it only knew how to answer that language with teeth. So I refused to speak it. I gave it nothing to answer. I reached for the skill the way I'd reach for any tool laid out on the bench. Not a shout, not a grab. A hand held out, open, in the dark. Easy now. Nobody here is going to raise a hand to you. You're a long way from home, and so am I, and I'm not going to hurt you. And that's the whole of it. The panther's ears came up off its skull. For a long moment, it just watched me, low and coiled, the tip of its tail flicking once against the dirt. I stayed exactly where I was and let the quiet do the work. I could hear my own heart, slow and even, and I made sure it stayed that way because it could hear it too. And a steady heartbeat is a thing no fist ever gave it. I didn't reach out. I didn't crouch to make myself small and false. I just stood in its path with my hands open and my fear laid down in the dirt like a dropped tool, and I waited for it to come and check whether that was true. It took a step toward me. I let it. It took another, stiff-legged, testing the ground and testing me, and I stood in the churned dirt with a mountain of a bear sitting quiet behind me, and I did not move one muscle, and the entire arena held a single enormous breath. Then, something behind the golden eyes changed. Whatever it had braced itself to find in me, it kept coming, and it kept not finding it. The long black spine unknotted, ridge by ridge, the way a fist unclenches when it finally believes the blow isn't coming, and it left the ground. Somebody in the stands shrieked. I heard Grace start forward, and I heard Hannah catch her by the arm and hold on. The panther hit me chest high, 150 pounds of muscle that a minute before had put a star sage flat on his back, and it drove its huge blunt head up under my chin and licked me. One broad, rough scrape of the tongue clean across my jaw, and then it twisted and rolled. All four paws turned up at the white sky, writhing against my legs in the dirt like the largest and most murderous house cat ever born, asking, plainly, to have its belly rubbed. So I rubbed its belly. What else is there to do? Above me, the school was losing its mind. The word going around the stands wasn't bear anymore, and it certainly wasn't reject. Somebody said it low and sure, and then it was everywhere at once, that no ordinary tamer peels another man's beast off him like that. That this was the old power, the half-legend, the skill that reaches down into a bonded animal, tears the bond out by the root, and makes the creature yours while it breaks the man who raised it, a beast stealer. They passed the word hand to hand, the way you'd pass the name of the thing a grandmother invents to keep children out of the woods. They had it completely, beautifully wrong, and I let them. Because sitting there in the dirt with a panther purring in my lap, I already knew the plain truth, and the plain truth was sadder than any legend. I hadn't stolen a thing. There had been nothing to steal. Wesley never owned this animal for one single second of its life. He'd looped a leash around a frightened creature and mistaken flinching for love. And every day it had done as it was told for one reason only. It was more afraid of him than it was of the whole wide world. I hadn't shattered a bond. I'd just walked up and become the first living person in this animal's entire memory who never once raised a hand to it. That's the secret. That's the whole legendary power. You stop being the thing it's afraid of, and it stops needing to fight you. The panther yawned enormous and warm against my chest, done being anybody's weapon. Above me, 1,000 voices climbed over one another, trying to name what they'd watched. And not one of them, anywhere in that arena, was laughing. I sat in the middle of the ring, with the impossible beast gone soft in my lap, and I let the whole school look. The whole school was still looking when they carried Wesley past me. 4 men had him on a stretcher, and he was awake. I heard him before I saw him, the same voice that had once held a carved pendant over his head and called it eternal, now cracked and climbing, throwing threats down at the animal in my lap. He called the panther a traitor. He said it had turned on its owner, that it was disqualified, cast out, that he would have it hunted down and put in the ground for what it had done to him. The words came fast and shrill and landed on nothing. An hour ago, that voice had run this arena. Now it was just a boy on a board being carried off his own battlefield, and everyone in the stands could hear the difference. The panther did not so much as flick an ear at him. It rose out of my lap instead, unhurried, all that black weight uncoiling, and it padded across the sand. not toward the master who was screaming for it, but past the stretcher entirely, like the stretcher wasn't there. It went to the rail where Grace and Hannah stood. It pushed its broad head up under Grace's open hand, and she laughed, soft and startled, and cupped its jaw. Then it rolled clean over onto its side in the dirt and let Hannah scratch beneath its chin, and the low thunder that rolled out of its chest carried clear across a silent arena. The beast Wesley had smuggled in to kill me was purring for the two people he had spent all morning trying to prove I'd corrupted. Nobody in the stands made a sound, not the sponsors under their striped shade, who'd come to buy the year's best recruits and were watching the year's brightest go out feet first. Not the students banked up the rails, the ones who'd thrown me off a stage and voted me into the trash class and spent a whole term deciding I was nothing. They just watched. The only voice left in that whole arena was Wesley's, and the only sound answering it was a killer cat purring under the hands of the girls he despised. And there, for one instant, flat on his back and going past me, it reached him. He had built the entire thing to erase me. The trap, the beast, the crowd, the perfect public end. And the crowd had stayed, and the beast had chosen. And the boy he'd ground under his heel and thrown out with the trash was sitting whole in the middle of the ring with a legend climbing up around his name. He understood it the way you understand a stair that isn't there, all at once and too late. Everything he'd thrown away had landed on its feet. He was the one who'd broken. He was the one they were carrying off. Then the stretcher passed, and I was myself again, watching him go. He didn't hold the understanding long. By the time they reached the gate, he'd stopped cursing the panther and started pleading with the men carrying him. Not about the pain, from what I could catch of it, but about where they were taking him. He begged them not to log it at the infirmary, not to write his name in the injured book, because an injury on the record meant a rank drop, and his rank was the last thing he had left to lose. That was the final piece of him I heard. A boy who had thrown away a friend over a number, terrified now of his own number, carried out the very gate Grace and Hannah had run in through an hour before. The whole school watched all of it. Not one of them laughed with him. Not one of them laughed at all. The vice principal was already trying to leave. Crane had a bounty to pay. He'd announced it himself, loudly, in front of everyone. A prize for whoever took the Tamers tournament, back when he was certain the winner would be anyone but me. Now that the winner was me, he'd discovered a sudden and urgent need to be somewhere else. Something about lunch. He gathered his robe up in both hands and turned for the shade at the back of the dais with the brisk, prim walk of a man who believed a promise made loudly enough could be forgotten quietly enough. He got about 3 steps. "The bounty hasn't been paid yet." Ms. Dawson planted herself square in his path, arms folded, and she didn't lower her voice for anyone. Crane tried to wave the whole thing off. Later, some other day, there were forms to file, procedures, and she cut through every word of it. "Pay it now," she told him, right here, in front of the school he'd announced it in front of. Or she would walk it straight to the school board that same afternoon and let them ask, out loud, why the academy dangled a prize it never meant to honor the moment the wrong boy won it. That stopped him where the crowd hadn't, a grudge he could nurse for years. The school board he could not survive, so he paid. He counted it out with his teeth clenched hard enough that I could see the muscle jumping in his gaunt jaw, and the whole time he muttered something low and venomous about this not being finished, about a debt of his own he fully intended to collect one day. I let it slide past me the way I'd let all of it slide past me for a whole term. This was the man who'd built a cage out of obligation tickets and fine print and quiet threats. A careful little system designed to prove that a boy with no class could be owned, billed, taxed, and finally buried under paperwork. And here he stood, in front of the entire academy, forced to put a prize into that boy's hands and call it his by right. The cage he'd spent months building came apart in the open, one counted coin at a time, and there was nothing left in his fine print that could stop it. Then the others closed in before he could think better of it. Grace on one side, Hannah on the other, Ms. Dawson driving the whole thing, Mark laying his enormous shadow over the lot of us, the panther leaning its warm weight against my leg, and between all of them, they more or less pried the last of the prize out of Crane's fingers and pressed it into mine. "Congratulations, Adrian." Grace was beaming like the sun had come out for this alone. Hannah folded at the waist, formal as ever, even now. "I humbly offer my congratulations, Master." Ms. Dawson announced that my true reward, naturally, was one of her personal head pats, and delivered it firmly to the top of my head before I could get a word in to decline. Grace tilted her head and asked with complete sincerity what these head pats were that Ms. Dawson kept promising the whole school. I didn't have an answer for her. I'm not sure anyone alive did. 3 people congratulated me out loud. 3, in a stand packed with hundreds who had watched me tame the untamable not an hour before, and were still passing the word legend back and forth to each other, like it might catch fire. It should have stung, maybe. It didn't. The three who said it aloud were the exact three who'd have said it back when I was still trash, and it cost them something. And that, in the end, was the whole difference between them and everyone else in that arena. Behind us, the wealth board updated in real time, the way it always did, numbers ticking over for the whole school to read. The special training class sat at the very top of it, the discard room, the trash class, the place they dumped whatever they'd already decided to forget. Top of the board, on the record, where none of them could pretend not to see it. They had spent a year refusing to say my name. Now the academy itself had spelled it out in gold for them. I left the grounds the way I'd come in, except now there was a bear on one side of me and a black panther on the other. The panther was mine, if it was anyone's. Wesley had disowned it in front of the whole school, cast it out, put it down, all of that, screamed at the top of his lungs, which meant no one was going to say a word when it fell in at my hip and walked out the gate beside me like it had done exactly that all its life. It matched my stride without being asked. The lane home ran up past the upper terraces, where the students with money kept their houses, or had kept them. A whole row of them stood flattened now. Good builds, the expensive kind. Roofs caved and walls folded flat into the dirt, as though something very large had simply sat down on each one in turn and then moved on. Students knelt in the wreckage of them, crying. I slowed at first, because from a distance, I honestly thought something terrible had happened to them. Then I got close enough to hear what they were saying to one another through the tears, and I stopped feeling anything about it at all. They weren't mourning an accident. They were mourning a plan. They'd meant to march on my house at noon, the trash boy's eyesore, the one they'd all agreed had no business standing on their campus, and pull it down to the foundation while I was safely across the grounds, losing a tournament I'd been arranged to lose. Mark had wandered into the wrong yard for them on his way to the arena, or the right yard for me. He never went near my home. He'd flattened theirs in passing, casual as a man stepping over a puddle, and now they knelt in the splinters of their fine houses, weeping about how unfair the world had turned out to be. I walked on past them without slowing again. The panther bumped its head against my hip, and I looked down at it, really looked this time, at the way it had decided, somewhere back in that ring when I stopped being afraid of it, that I was its person, and that was simply the end of the matter. It needed a name. I've never been any good at the grand ones. Tom, I said. It lifted one heavy paw off the ground and set it back down, slow and deliberate, like a man agreeing to a deal he'd already made his mind up about. Tom, then. Tom it was. There was already someone riding home in my pocket. The little sewer rat had been with me since the night I'd pulled her half-starved out of a tube in the dark. Gray, quick, and lately, just quietly along for everything I did. On the walk home, she climbed to the lip of my pocket and sat up to watch the road go by, and I decided she'd earned a name as much as the panther had. I tried a plain one on her first. She balked at it. Actually balked, turned her whole nose away like I'd insulted her mother. And when I looked closer, I understood the complaint. She was a she, and she wanted something better than the first dull thing to fall off my tongue. Jewel, I told her. She went completely still. Then she climbed the rest of the way up my sleeve and pressed her nose to my cheek, one over on the spot, making that small clicking sound rats make when they've decided you'll do after all. Jewel it was. She rode the last stretch of road on my shoulder like she'd been promoted. And then the trees opened up and there was home. I still called it the discard room out of pure habit, but there was nothing discarded about it anymore, and there hadn't been for a long time. They'd handed my class the worst land on the whole campus, a barren scrap of forest at the far edge. The plot you send the things you want to forget you have. I'd spent every day since turning it into something they hadn't planned for. Fields in neat rows, heavy and green with food, while the rest of the school went hungry over its obligation tickets. Timber houses that stood up straight and didn't fall down. A wall. A saint who'd chosen, of her own free will, to stand inside that wall. The ground they'd thrown away as trash was the safest, richest, best-fed acre for miles, and I felt the whole of it settle into place under me as I stepped through my own gate. Then the base itself answered, the way it always did, quiet, internal, a plain line of fact laid down in my head, like a tool set on a bench. The home had grown again. It had crossed over into something new, and this time, what it had learned was how to defend itself. Base defense. The house I'd raised out of the land nobody wanted could hold a wall now, against the people already sitting up in the wreckage of their own homes, plotting how to take it. And they were plotting. I had no doubt of it. Crane had promised me as much through his teeth not 2 hours ago. Let them come and find out. One resident lived behind this wall now, and 3 companion beasts stood with him, a bear, a panther, and a rat. The trash heap had quietly turned itself into a fortress, and it had finished the job, on the very same afternoon the schemers knelt weeping in the ruins of their fine, expensive houses. I stood in my own gate with the gold light lying over all of it, and for a long moment, I just let myself believe it was mine. The noise of the school was gone. That was the thing I noticed most, standing there while the light went red behind the trees. All day there had been a roar around me, the stands, the gossip, the legend climbing over itself, 1,000 voices busy deciding what I was and what impossible power I must be hiding. Out here, there was none of it, just the tick of the cooling fields, Mark's slow, heavy breathing somewhere behind my shoulder, Tom folding himself down into the last warm bar of sun, Jewel a small weight tucked against my collar. It was quiet enough, finally, to hear myself think, and what I thought about, of everything I could have chosen in that moment, was the pendant. I still wore mine, a little piece of pale wood on a thin brown cord, carved by hand. One of a whole set I'd made what felt like a lifetime ago, back when I still believed the people I made them for were my friends. I'd carved one for the entire class. I'd taken the most time and the best grain and the steadiest hand on the one I made for Wesley. I could feel the making of it even now if I let myself, choosing the piece of wood off the pile because the grain in it ran clean and close, working it down slow after the others were asleep, thumb and blade, until the edges stopped catching and went soft to the touch. I'd wanted his to be the best because I'd wanted him to know, without my ever having to say it out loud, that of everyone in that class, he was the one I counted on. I put a whole quiet winter of caring into a scrap of wood the size of a coin, and I gave it to him with both hands, and he wore it exactly long enough to hold it over his head and call it eternal in front of a crowd. I could still see the day it ended, clearer than I'd like. The stage, the board above the goddess statue, lighting up with my whole life written out in a column of ones. Wesley holding my pendant up over his head in front of everyone, calling it a symbol of our eternal friendship in that warm, easy carrying voice of his. And then, the second the number came up wrong and the hall turned cruel, dropping it in the dirt and grinding it flat under his heel while the whole school watched him do it. That was the wound, not the fall off the stage, not the trash class, not the barren land, not any of what came after. The wound was the moment the person I trusted most in the world looked straight at me, decided I was worth nothing, and then stepped on the proof that I had loved him like a brother. I'd carried that a long way. Under every house I raised, every row I planted, every skill I poured that one useless number into, underneath all of it, quiet and patient, there was still a boy standing on a stage waiting for someone to laugh with him instead of at him. Waiting, if I'm honest with myself, for one thing far more than any prize or any bounty. Not revenge. I never once wanted revenge. I'm not built for it. What I wanted was for the friendship to have been real. I wanted to have been wrong about him. I wanted the pendant to have meant the thing I meant when I sat up late carving it. And there in my own gate at dusk, with a fortress at my back and a whole family breathing easy in the yard, I finally let that wish go. It wasn't real. It was never going to have been real, and no ending was going to reach back and change that. Wesley had priced me the day he met me and thrown me out the afternoon the price came back low and nothing. Not his stretcher, not his ruin, not 100 apologies he would never in his life offer me, could turn what we'd had into something it had simply never been. I could stand out here and wait the rest of my days for him to be sorry. He was, at that very moment, being carried off a battlefield he'd built, too frightened of a rank drop to even be sorry. And if I let his cruelty stand as the last word on it, then he still owned a piece of me, out here, in the one place on this earth he would never set foot. So I didn't give him that. I closed my hand around my own pendant instead. The wood was warm from the whole day's sun, worn smooth on one face, where my thumb had gone over it 1,000 times without my noticing. And I let the other one go, the one in the dirt, ground flat under his heel, the friendship that had only ever been mine and never once his. I grieved it the way you're allowed to grieve a thing that has actually died. And then I set it down, on my own terms, and in my own time, and by nobody's leave but mine, and I stopped carrying it. The boy nobody wanted had built himself a home, a family, a name they'd been made to say out loud, in gold, in front of the entire school. The one number they'd all laughed at had quietly become every skill I ever needed, and the dead land they'd thrown me out onto had become the safest ground for miles in any direction. I didn't need Wesley to be sorry. I didn't need the pendant to have been real. I already had everything the pendant was ever supposed to promise, and I had built every last piece of it with my own 2 hands. Tom stretched long in the red light and yawned wide, done being anybody's weapon. Jewel burrowed her nose in under my collar. Behind the wall, out past the fields, the world went on being enormous. The academy, the sponsors, the King's Long roads, all of it out there and far bigger than one campus. And someday it was going to come looking for what I'd made in this forgotten corner. Let it come. There was a wall now. There were the ones who'd stayed, and there was me, and I was not the boy on the stage anymore. I turned and went inside, and I left the stage behind me for good.